Okay. Noting the hour and the presence of a quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so online using ActonTV's YouTube channel found at the top of our agenda. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. Thank you, ActonTV. In fact, I would encourage, if you're thinking of coming in tonight to watch the meeting, probably better to stay at home because we're sitting on stairs and piano benches at this point in here. So welcome, everybody. Great to have such a big audience this evening. All right, we're going to move into public participation, and I'll read my thing first, and then I will ask a question of the group here. So per our School Committee Policy BEDH, members of the public are invited to speak, typically for up to 3 minutes. Public participation will only take place during this time in our meeting. Speakers must be recognized by the chair, and as a reminder, the committee does not typically respond to comments made during public participation. Can I see by a show of hands how many people here this evening wish to speak so that we can figure out? There was a gasp and a groan all at once. All right, so I'm going to allocate more than usual. I'll give ourselves 30 minutes, but I'm going to ask everybody to keep to 2 minutes in their speaking so that everyone here does have an opportunity to speak. I don't want to cut off public participation, but I do recognize a lot of you have concerns that you want to communicate to the committee. I want to give everybody that time, but I also need to keep the meeting moving forward. So I'm going to set a 30-minute timer on my phone, and then we're going to also time each speaker for a maximum of 2 minutes. So when you hear me, I'll probably give you about a 30-second warning. Please start to wrap it up so that the next folks here can speak this evening. Let's do this then. We'll have the first person who's interested in speaking come up to the microphone, and then if you want to begin a queue behind that, we can move through all of the speakers pretty quickly. And if you wouldn't mind, please do give us your name and address, or at least whether or not you're a resident of Acton or Boxborough when you do come up to speak. So, setting a 30-minute timer. Go ahead. All right, we're not going to be able to readjust the microphone for each speaker because I only want to spend 30 minutes on this. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, Madeline Cruz, 6 Station Way, Acton. I'm here tonight because recently life has thrown some curveballs at me that has left me in need of help. And recently I had vouchers, and when I was looking for after-school care for my daughter, I was informed that Acton-Boxborough no longer takes vouchers. And I think that you all need to reconsider that because a lot of our families here in Acton are desperate and need to have the school accept these vouchers again. Without it, I mean, we're screwed. And my daughter not only needs it because I need to move forward with my life and get my life back on track, but she has disabilities and it's a recommendation from her neuropsych, and I need the help, and I really do wish that you would all reconsider to start accepting these vouchers again. I know that they ended during COVID for whatever reason, but it's something that's our community needs, and I'm asking you to please do your due diligence to make sure that these vouchers are accepted again. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Amanda Montero. I'm a reading specialist in Acton-Boxborough. I'm speaking tonight because you'll receive a report, or you have received a report dealing with a lot of things, but the use of time of math and reading specialists was part of it. I can say that we were pretty shocked when we saw some of the numbers, and I know they've been adjusted, but you'll get a report that says we spend less than 75%, much less than 75% of our time with students. And our lived experience is that we seem to spend all our time with students. So I've done the math for my own schedule, and I know for the bare minimum work week, that's 2,100 minutes. That's what the math was based off of that you received. But the fact is that elementary students are physically in school for 1,800 minutes per week. If you're looking at the time that students are actually in school, I spend 69% of that time with them. If you include my lunch and prep, which I desperately need and am contractually obliged to have, then that accounts for 86% of the school day. At my school, there are also times times in which every student in the building is in an important SCL or community building activity. So they're not actually available for intervention services. So we have all-school assembly, morning meeting, learning buddies where grade levels get together and do wonderful things like kindergartners and sixth graders bonding. It's beautiful. But if you account for those times, I'm with students 98% of the time that they're in a building available to have intervention. The 2% of time happens to be a 10-minute gap between two of our intervention blocks. So 98% of the time I'm with students when they can have intervention. So I just want to make it clear that there is not hidden, easy efficiency that can be drawn out of the reading and math specialists. The goal of us spending more time supposedly is to see more students, but there isn't time to see an additional group. When I am pulled out of a meeting for MTSS, 504, IUP, then I can miss groups, but I wouldn't have time to see other groups. If you don't have me go to those meetings, I can have more time with the students I already have, but I wouldn't actually be able to add more. So I just want that to be clear. And I would like to end with a warning about the possibility of eliminating reading assistants. I know it's not on that report or on the table yet, but it's been recommended before. And just let you know, they do half of the intervention in my school for reading. So even if I pulled kids from assembly, it would never make up for what they do. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Allison Symes. I am the art teacher at Merriam Elementary School. This is my 7th year teaching here at Merriam, but my 14th year teaching in public schools. I'm here tonight to speak on the proposed cuts to our specialist team and why I feel it would be detrimental to our elementary students' learning and well-being. If you go to our school district website, the first thing that you will see is the following statement: developing engaged, well-balanced learners through collaborative and caring relationships, followed by our core values, which are wellness, equity, and engagement. In a time when we are seeing an alarming increase in the needs of our student population, why are we presenting even more cuts to staff who work directly with our students? As a specialist, I see every single student in our school each week. For me, that means 397 children. And I have the pleasure of helping these students grow and develop from kindergarten through 6th grade. This has allowed me to get to know and care for my students in a way that is unique to my specialist position, as we are the only ones in the building that know the entire student body. By the time students leave 6th grade, it often feels as if I'm saying goodbye to family. We know deep in our hearts and from all the data that exists out there that caring relationships with students matter. It is in fact so important that it is written into our core values statement. Finally, I want to add that I was deeply saddened to see that our classroom assistants were described as low-hanging fruit in a document created by the Elementary Budget Task Force. Describing professionals in our district who love and care for our students every day as low-hanging fruit strikes me as the opposite of our core value of equity. I want to work in a place where all people are valued equally, and I hope that you do as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jill Reed, and I'm the physical education specialist at the Gates Elementary School. I've been teaching in the Acton-Boxborough schools for more than 20 years. I've been full-time at Gates for the past 12 years. Before that, I spent my time in 2 buildings a week. And I have also taught in 4 of these 6 elementary schools. I've had firsthand experience of what it's like to teach in 2 different schools during the school week. You don't feel like you really belong to either community. There are different cultures in each school, and you aren't able to build strong relationships with students or staff. As a unified arts educator in one elementary school, one of the best parts of my job is to be able to build a 7-year relationship with students. To me, that's huge. We meet these learners as 5-year-olds and watch them grow into young adolescents as they finish 6th grade. I feel that since I've been in the same building as a full-time unified arts educator, I have been able to make better connections and relationships, not only with students, but also with their families. When the unified arts educators have the opportunity to work in the same building for an extended period, we can collaborate more effectively with our colleagues. We can share insights and build a shared vision for the development of our school's community. This fosters an environment of innovation and consistency, which is essential for creating a high-quality educational experience for all students. Over time, these relationships contribute to students' success, not only in physical education, but also in the broader academic and social context.
30 seconds.
Consistent and stable relationships with students also enable us unified arts educators to better understand individual student needs, strengths, and challenges, which fosters a stronger sense of connection and belonging within the school community. When the unified arts educators are present daily in the buildings, we're better positioned to align our instruction with the school's values, priorities, and ongoing initiatives. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brendan Ferrari. I live at 2 Morton Street with my wife Jen and my 2 kids, Nicholas and Benjamin, who attend school at Douglas. I'm also the music teacher at Gates. Like my colleagues and others, I'm speaking tonight to express my disappointment with the budget task force. Before teaching in Acton-Boxborough, I taught elementary music in Westford Public Schools. My position, similar to what is being recommended here, was to travel between 3 different grades 3 through 5 schools to cover the classes that the resident teacher at each school couldn't fit in their course load. Though I technically belonged to 3 different schools, I didn't feel a sense of belonging at any of them. Building staff were welcoming, but I felt like I was borrowing teaching spaces from the resident teachers and substitute teaching their kids. I could never be part of all school meetings, and I often wasn't able to conduct my own performances because I was elsewhere. The students were very kind, but there was always a sense of, I wasn't lucky to get my teacher this year, who I've known since kindergarten. Instead, I got the traveling guy. And not only that, but the traveling guy was almost never the same person over the years because this had constant turnover in this type of position. Curricularly, it was a nightmare. Just like here in Acton-Boxborough, each music room was a different size and shape and has significant differences in instruments, equipment, materials, which forced me to create multiple and, quite frankly, inequitable curricula for kids of the same grades across schools.
30 seconds.
3rd grade wasn't so bad because they had 3 years with their resident teacher at their K through 2 school, so I knew exactly what they had done with their resident teacher. They all took one path to get to me. But for higher grades, they consisted of a mixture of kids that had the resident teacher and or the traveling guys in varying years or paths. And this continues to multiply. So if this were to happen in Acton-Boxborough over 7 years from K through 6, a 6th grade class could potentially be a mixture of 64 different paths that kids could take bouncing back and forth.
Thank you, Brennan.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary O'Brien. I'm the physical education teacher at the Merriam School. I was shocked to learn of the proposal to reduce the elementary specialists in Acton. If you only look at the cost of our FTE salaries and the numbers of students at each of our schools, you miss our value as contributors to unique, welcoming, and compassionate learning communities committed to multi-language learners, children from diverse backgrounds, neurodiverse learners with unique learning needs, children with trauma in their current or past lives, and universal design to teach all learners the best ways. Acton has valued those caring and engaging types of learning communities and trained us or pushed us to change the way that we teach or look at teaching, and to not just teach our unique curriculums, but to learn more about and advocate for our most fragile learners to receive the best learning opportunities. This is my 20th year in Acton, and I remember when the 4 specialists at the 5 Acton schools for the elementary model was upgraded to 1 FTE per specialty per building in 2012. The high school had experienced some mental health crises, and the district had hired a Stanford consultant to analyze the staffing and culture at the high school to do more to help all students feel connected to a trusted teacher and seen at school. Our superintendent, Steve Mills, felt it was important for our elementary students to also feel seen and cared for. The same message of Leslie's trauma-informed schools approach. At that time, the district made the decision to support student mental health in all schools, including the elementaries, and develop stronger student-teacher connections.
30 seconds.
Under the single school model, we all felt and still feel more connected to and able to see students and teachers and advocate for more of our students' learning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Ferrari, and I live at 2 Martin Street. My husband Brendan and I have 2 elementary-age children in the district at Douglas Elementary School. I am also a visual art teacher in a neighboring school district. I was originally going to focus my time on the positive impact of full-time teachers on student achievement, how reduced positions negatively impact teacher morale, and how part-time positions create lack of curricular continuity for students. But I'll leave that to my colleagues in this room who also came to speak tonight because I trust and value their acute perspectives and expertise. And that brings me to what I'd like to talk about, how the school committee, AB school leadership, and the members of the elementary budget task force mistreated and disrespected our treasured teachers throughout this process. From the task force brainstorming document on December 3rd, it was clear to me that, quote, the goal of this brainstorm was not to fact-check each response, but to better understand perspectives on each potential recommendation. I'm sorry, but I fail to see how assuming how someone else will perceive something is more beneficial or direct than going to the source, the teachers whose positions are in question. These professionals who together have decades of experience were blindsided 8 days ago with recommendations that the integrity of their positions is in jeopardy. When the conversation at the task force meetings became about people who were not present in the room, contact should have at least been made to the program director of those affected. I understand that balancing a budget is hard work, but being a kind, empathetic human being is not. These loyal professionals have been treated just like the report from New Solutions K-12 treated them, as numbers that can easily be subtracted and divided. New Solutions K-12 called their recommendations and the findings, quote, opportunities. Who are they opportunistic for? Because it isn't the professionals referenced in the report. You know, I see a lot of words like transparency, trust, and relationships being used on the AB school website when talking about core values and beliefs. But words like this mean nothing if not followed by actions. For example, according to the 2021 to 2026 district strategy, a belief of AB schools is to, quote, build relationships and trust with students, families, and colleagues where it is safe to make mistakes and learn from others. Well, I can tell you one thing for certain, you have irreparably damaged the relationships you have with these individuals and broken the trust they placed in you. A very big mistake was made, and I certainly hope that the leadership before me intends to take ownership of it. A public apology for the disrespect shown for our beloved teachers should be just the beginning. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michelle LaFlamme, and I'm the library media teacher at Conant Elementary. I'm here today because I want to make sure that despite the task force and consultants' findings, key information in the areas of how we use our time when we are not teaching a class and our value, frankly, should be known. Aside from the obvious of grading assignments, differentiating instruction based on ongoing observations of student needs, students that we know, and of course, administering a library facility, there's one key component that significantly affects our students, and that is the ability to collaborate. When I say collaboration, yes, there's the collaborating on research and school-wide enrichment, but more importantly is the collaboration with regard to our shared students and their needs. So set aside everything else that we do and just focus on the following. Over the past 2 years, I've gotten to know my students really well. I know what they can do, and I know how and when I can push them. So when I see a significant change in a student's academic and behavior development from one year to the next, I become concerned and I do something about it. And when that happens, I meet with the classroom teacher and others to bring up concerns I have with a student's present levels of performance if it doesn't match what's in their IEP. We meet to share information with each other and brainstorm accommodations. We come up with a plan we try out. In the meantime, I take all that stuff we discussed in our meeting and I meet with the rest of my building's Unified Arts colleagues to share what I learned, including the strategies, and then we begin a plan to observe the student over the course of a few weeks so that we can provide the classroom teacher with data that better pinpoints this particular student's challenges, which in the long run, and the moral of the story, helps to get us to get the student the support they desperately need but don't currently have. I'm just going to jump to the end then. So there's all this about, importance of developing student relationships, and it doesn't matter what kind of, you could have the best learning objectives and essential questions and differentiated supports, but forget the lesson if you don't have a strong student-teacher relationship. They're not going to learn. And that is when I see my students every day, day after day after day, I am building that relationship with them. So when discussing schedules, when discussing the consequences of your decisions, please discuss the consequences of not being able to meet with each other and our colleagues to support our students, and the consequences of not being able to build relationships with our students if we can't see them day after day after day.
Thanks.
we have significantly different heights. Good evening. My name is Heather Haynes, and that's terrible. I wear many different hats in this community. First and foremost, I'm a parent of a 19-year-old who graduated last year and a 17-year-old junior. My hope for my children is that they're cared for, appreciated, and supported to become the wonderful adults we're thinking about in our vision of a graduate work. I'm also currently the elementary curriculum coordinator, and before that spent 10 years focused on math in the elementary schools. Thanks. Our district's work of the past 7 years to create a multi-tiered system of support is the work I believe makes our children feel appreciated, cared for, and supported to become the wonderful adult members of our community that we hope for. MTSS, as you all know, starts with Tier 1, and this is where all students have access to grade level learning. The work that classroom teachers do to support all students is hard work and is often done in isolation. The STEAM and literacy coaches are critical thought partners for educators to support this important work in Tier 1. To help all students to access Tier 1 instruction, some students need support in Tier 2 and Tier 3, and some of that support can happen with teachers, and some of that support is with the math and literacy, is happening with our math and reading specialists who have the expertise and understanding of the progression of skills students must build from kindergarten through 6th grade and beyond in Tier 1 instruction.
20 seconds.
We all acknowledge, including myself, the critical importance of literacy, and I want to also share that numeracy is equally important. Longitudinal studies done in the UK have shown that weak numeracy impacts students' future income, health, and educational outcomes throughout their lives. Low numeracy skills also shut students out of opportunities in college and careers, and our math and reading specialists act as supports and advocates for students and are critical members of our team of professionals that make this system work. I don't have time to list all the folks who are critical parts of this system, but unified arts educators, counselors, psychologists, all make the system work. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Celia Knight. I have taught visual arts for the last 17 years at the Gates School. I am also the visual arts elementary liaison who oversees the elementary visual arts department. To offer a different angle on these proposed cuts, I now want to specifically focus on the work of the elementary visual arts teachers in this district because that is what I know best. Our visual arts elementary team collaborates incredibly successfully in curriculum development and supports each other in teaching in a way that is not typical in other districts. Over my 17 years with the district, I have been told multiple times by AB administrators that the elementary art department is a model of what successful collaboration looks like. This caliber of commitment provides our students with highly effective and engaging visual arts interdisciplinary learning experiences throughout their elementary career. I know I'm able to bring my best self to do this incredibly important work because I've always felt very valued as an integral part of this district. I bring the same level of commitment to the many STEAM collaborations I do at Gates. If I was at multiple schools, I know I would no longer have the capacity to bring such commitment to this type of collaboration and dedication to curriculum development. AB attracts and builds incredibly successful and innovative elementary visual arts teachers that have won multiple Massachusetts Teacher and New Teacher of the Year awards. I've been part of many hiring committees. When a visual arts position opens in our district, applicants flock to apply. If the school committee imposes these cuts to the unified arts, this trend will most definitely end. AB will no longer attract the best. No teacher wants to work in more than one school. It cuts you in half, your time in half, your positive mindset in half, your patience in half, and your dedication to your craft. They are all whittled down. We talk about the importance of the whole child all the time at AB. Why aren't we treating our teachers with the same values? With experience, teachers grow and improve over time. By making these cuts, I know my students will suffer because I will not be able to be the teacher I want to be for them. Lastly, I just want to say that the Gates Unified Arts teachers teach 100+ pre-K students at the Carol Huber Early Education Program, and I don't think this information has been talked about at all in the New Solutions review, and I'm assuming that they would be losing their Unified Arts programming completely. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Laura Harrington. I'm the Library Media Specialist at McT. I'm new to McT this year, but this is my 20th year as a school library media teacher. And I am standing before you today because I am concerned. I am concerned that in their slide deck, New Solutions K-12 lists 2.0 full-time library employees at McT and Merriam and at Gates and Douglas. The Merriam and Douglas libraries are staffed by dedicated, hardworking library assistants, not qualified library school media teachers. They are paid accordingly. If the district has allocated teacher salaries to those schools and the employees are collecting assistant wages, where is the difference in funding? I am concerned that New Solutions implies that anyone teaching fewer than 25 classes a week is not working full-time. I teach 20 to 22 classes a week, and the rest of my time is spent doing a number of tasks, as are all my library media colleagues. When we are not teaching, we are gathering resources for classroom teachers, we are organizing and evaluating library materials, and I'm concerned because I have been tasked with maintaining the library collection shared by 2 schools because I am the qualified school library media teacher, yet my schedule provides me no additional time to perform these duties. I am concerned because AB elementary students do not attend technology classes and cuts are being suggested to the library media program. Digital citizenship, coding, and engineering are all being taught in the elementary school libraries in accordance with the Mass Digital Literacy and Computer Science standards, in addition to us teaching media literacy, evaluation, ethical use of information. When my position is eliminated because of short-term cost reductions, what will be the long-term consequences for elementary students who are no longer receiving this instruction? How will AB students achieve academic success without these schools? Research shows schools with professionally staffed school libraries have higher reading, writing, information literacy scores, as well as higher graduation rates. Studies show that Title I schools and English language learners recognize even greater academic success with certified school library media teachers. Concerned with the short-sightedness of suggesting reducing elementary specialists across the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, folks, I'm trying to get as many people to participate as possible. When you take extra time, you're taking time from your colleagues. 2 minutes, go ahead.
Dear school committee, my name is Marley Castle and I am the music teacher at Merriam School. I have been teaching for 10 years with 7 of those years being at Merriam, and I'd like to share the potential impact of losing members of our Unified Arts team on our schools and our students. I read through the presentation given from NSK-12 Consulting and the proposals the Elementary Budget Task Force has shared. I first want to share how upsetting it was to learn of these discussed cuts via the school website and not from any administrator or committee member. I find that to be very unprofessional, especially when we're talking about direct impacts to our students and to people's livelihoods. My department head was not interviewed as a stakeholder in this process. He's the only department leader our district has left after the decision was made to not rehire the PE or visual arts department leaders years ago. If anyone should have been interviewed as a stakeholder, it's him. I'm wondering if the school committee asked about how this trickles down to not only affect students, but also the everyday functioning of our elementary schools. My colleagues and I are certified teachers with master's degrees, but we also serve other roles in our schools, like drop-off duty in the morning, bus duty after school, and occasionally covering other classes in the building. One more item not accounted for in the presentation is that the number of sections does not accurately reflect what we teach each week. Some of us teach adaptive PE, chorus, and extra rotation classes to cover those MTSS data meetings. And while I appreciate the Budget Task Force's consideration of the potential benefits and disadvantages of the proposal, it must be said that some of the potential benefits are not benefits at all. I'd encourage all of you to look at, for example, the benefits box of Proposal 4B and ask yourself whether those supposed benefits actually are. It is stated that the proposed cut was an easy, no-brainer solution, referring to a proposal that is potentially so detrimental to students' well-being, school community, and to our profession as an easy, no-brainer solution is inconsiderate, short-sighted, and insulting. Do we really want students to see multiple teachers throughout their elementary years? If you cut one position from every single department, there will effectively be one elementary school that loses their entire specialist team. Lastly, I want to say that when I started teaching at AB, I thought that this district might be where I retire. As much as I'd like for that to happen, I'm wondering if that's going to be possible. At this point, I simply hope I get to decide that for myself and that the loyalty to this community hasn't been for nothing.
Hello and good evening. My name is Margaret Ingham. I'm a first grade teacher at Blanchard. I'm here tonight to share my thoughts regarding the recent recommendations from the task force to reduce classroom assistants. As a teacher in the district for 28 years, I've worked closely with many of our assistants. I've seen the positive impact they have with both students and teachers. The academic demands have greatly increased the need for additional support for our students. Our classroom assistants play a key role in helping to support Tier 1 instruction during MTSS blocks by supporting small reading and math groups during ELA and math. Assistant support positively increases students' time on learning. Classroom assistants work directly with students, supporting their academic, social, and emotional needs throughout the day. Oftentimes, our assistants are our eyes and ears to help navigate the many challenges our students face. Whether it's tying a shoe, zipping a coat, finding a lost water bottle, taking them to the nurse when they've lost their first tooth, or even helping them communicate hurt feelings with a peer on the playground. Classroom assistants are the heart and soul of what it takes to support and encourage our most vulnerable students on a daily basis, and they are passionate about their jobs. In addition, with the increasing ML population, teachers have seen firsthand how classroom assistants play a crucial role in helping these students acclimate to the classroom and school setting by providing the necessary one-to-one support. Classroom assistants are our most valuable personnel in the district, and to reduce their positions, especially at the elementary level, would greatly impact our school climate.
30 seconds.
When making these cuts, please consider the direct impact on students before you make your decisions. We should not be cutting the personnel who work directly with our students. As an educator, I can't say enough how much our classroom assistants matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Marga.
Hi, my name is Maren Gulliver. I live on School Street and I'm the K-6 literacy coach shared between the Blanchard and Conant schools. I've worked in the district for the past 10 years as a classroom teacher and now in my current role. I've attended the AB elementary schools since kindergarten, including being a student in this very, very old building. My roots in the schools are deep, and I very much hope that for my own 2 young children, we'll have access to the incredible learning opportunities at AB in the next coming years. I'd like to acknowledge and appreciate the leadership of Tori and Peter in leading the incredibly challenging work of the Elementary Budget Task Force. I was grateful to participate in the final 2 sessions alongside devoted community members, staff, caregivers, and students. Bringing many stakeholders' voices to the same table to discuss structural budget changes is no small feat. The challenge of recommending personnel cuts for the 4th year in a row was truly excruciating. While there are benefits to an outside perspective to get us to this point, I urge you to strongly consider the voices of the professionals closest to the heart of our work when making a decision that will have significant and lasting impact. As a literacy coach, I work alongside educators from Blanchard and Conant engaged in dynamic and ever-changing work of supporting students. I collaborate closely with our reading specialists, math specialists, and STEAM coach. As a team, we partner with classroom teachers to make data-informed decisions about how to best support students across the tiers of instruction. Reading and math specialists are absolutely essential. Specialists work directly with students as much as possible in the constraints of a school day schedule. They are truly the ones providing support necessary to close gaps in student understanding. All of our specialists and coaches deeply value equitable opportunities for all students. While it is very true that inequities in the schools exist, I urge you to think through some of the unfortunate realities of reallocating specialists. We should be clear that additional support for some schools is very necessary. Additional is the key word here. We have advocated for years that one reading or math specialist per building cannot meet our students' needs. The proposal to cut staffing of non-classroom teacher roles to an equity formula would necessitate reducing math and reading specialist support for some buildings in order to provide additional support for others.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danielle Healy. I'm the reading specialist at Merriam. We crafted a letter, all of the reading specialists, and I'm going to read you an edited version of that now, but it is in your inbox. We all feel proud and honored to be part of our district's MTSS approach to our tiered instruction. Through our district's MTS model and approach to supporting students, we firmly believe that all students are capable of success. The MTSS blueprint from Massachusetts states, MTSS is a framework designed to meet the needs of all students by ensuring that schools optimize data-driven decisions, progress monitoring, and evidence-based supports and strategies with increasing intensity to sustain student growth. MTSS is not just about tiered interventions, but rather how all the systems in a school or district fit together to ensure a high-quality education for all students. Through this dynamic structure in our schools, we've been able to have database instructional meetings where various stakeholders, including teachers, special educators, administration, literacy coaches, and specialists, have opportunities to support tiered groups for students based on academic and social emotional needs. 2 outcomes suggested by the Elementary Budget Task Force as equity-focused strategies include increasing the amount of time reading and math specialists spend with students to serve more students, and assigning reading and math specialists district-wide based on student need, as opposed to 1 per school. Our team has concerns about these suggested outcomes. What will our dynamic MTSS structures really look like if these changes occur?
30 seconds.
Our whole school and whole team approach will not be able to sustain the structure that has been built, and in turn diminishing the high quality of instruction based on specialists traveling to different schools and sharing spaces. We take a problem-solving approach to much of what we do to meet the needs of our students, and we like to continue to do that. What will communication about students to families and colleagues look like? Time at meetings won't be as actionable if this proposed structure occurs. Students are at the heart of what we do and what we carry through each day.
Thank you.
Please keep them close to your core when supporting the next steps for Acton-Boxborough. Thanks.
Can I just see quickly how many people are left in line? We've used our 30 minutes. I would really like to keep it to just 5 more folks so that we can... 6? All right. 6. Thank you.
7.
No, I'm sorry. We're not going to take the 7th person. We've got to move on with our meeting. We actually need to deliberate on this topic.
No, that I had to stand in
Oh,
line.
that's why I asked. I'm sorry. We're gonna take the 6 people who are waiting in line, and then we're gonna move on with our agenda.
2 more minutes. She was just waiting.
I'm sorry. I need to keep the meeting moving forward. We've got a lot of other topics that we need to discuss tonight. We've heard a lot of comments. I'm happy to continue to hear the comments until the 6 people who are in line are done. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Leah Lally, and I'm a kindergarten and 1st grade teacher at Miriam. Tonight, I'm speaking on behalf of the K-1 team at Miriam in response to some of the possible proposals from the Budget Task Force. First, we'd like to state how much we value and appreciate the incredible work and support that classroom assistants provide to us, and most importantly, our students. The reference to assistant positions being low-hanging fruit turned the stomachs of many and left people feeling hurt, unappreciated, and undervalued. Some said they had never been made to feel this way in their entire working career. They do incredibly important work, and they should never be referred to in this manner. We hope an apology will soon be forthcoming. That said, the social and emotional needs of students are at an all-time high. Over the last 4 years or so, we've seen a measurable increase in the number of students who are emotionally dysregulated and exhibiting unsafe behaviors. This is a time to consider what additional supports they need so they can feel positive about themselves and their time in school. It is not a time to reduce specialists and counselors who can sometimes be their person in the school, the person they can turn to when things are hard. It is also not a time to reduce assistants who can provide in-the-moment support and be a trusted adult at lunch and recess because of the relationship that is built when they are working in the classroom. Worth noting is the fact that at Miriam, our assistants are the most diverse members of our staff.
20 seconds.
We understand that without additional state aid or an override, there is a need for cuts, but cutting people who work directly with kids should be the last resort. Assistants give you the biggest bang for your buck, and losing them would mean the impact on students would be significantly detrimental. Again, student-facing positions should be the very last positions to be cut.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Brandstein. I live on Sawmill Road in Acton. I've worked at Miriam for 14 years, 10 years as a classroom assistant, and this is my 4th year in the Miriam Library as the Miriam Library Media Assistant. I am a Massachusetts State Certified Classroom Teacher and Certified Reading Specialist. I've chosen to accept lower pay and status for a position that allows me to do what I love while maintaining a work-life balance. As a representative of low-hanging fruit, as well as the specials team, I know that I am giving substantial value for minimal pay. For my first 9 years as a classroom assistant, I worked 18 hours per week in one classroom. I knew the students and teacher well. It was a wonderful job, and I had no plan to leave it. Then the number of assistants was reduced. Assistants were spread thinner and moved around, working with students and teachers we didn't know. It went from being a challenging but rewarding position to being, from my point of view, impossible, frustrating, and depressing. I was not the only assistant to shift jobs or leave altogether at that time. That was when I moved into the library. I appreciated that the task force noted some concerns over the recommendation to reduce the number of specialists. One concern mentioned by the task force was that specialist teachers could, quote, be unhappy and leave. I can tell you that based on my experience as a classroom assistant, as well as my work in the library, this should be a significant concern. I love being in a job that allows me to read and recommend books to children, and working in a school library is extremely challenging. When I started in this position, I was the 8th library teacher that the 5th graders had during their prior 5 years at Merriam. The job became known as the Defense Against the Dark Arts position. No one lasted more than a year. Students did not feel known or understood. They did not trust that I would stay. I vividly remember one student suggesting that I should be very careful crossing the street.
Thank you. Your time is up.
When I came back for year 2, I got applause. We can make real difference in students' lives when we know students. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joanne Mills, and I am currently a 2nd and 3rd grade teacher at Merriam. I'm also a parent of 2 children that went through the Acton-Boxborough community school system. Our school, Merriam, was founded upon the idea that building a community to support students, teachers, and all staff would provide the best environment for our students. I've also felt and witnessed this philosophy throughout our district as a parent and as a colleague. For years, we have flourished within that community. However, it has changed drastically, and I feel compelled to speak. Based upon the data shared at our recent professional development meeting, 87% of public schools nationwide report a negative impact on social-emotional development of students since the pandemic. 79% of public schools nationwide report needing more support for student and/or staff mental health needs. Classroom disruptions have increased by over 56%. In conjunction with that data, the number and needs of our multilingual learners continue to rise. Since the start of the school year in our district, based upon Gabby's recent update, we began with 359 multilingual learners. We now have a total of 425, which is an increase of 66 students in 3.5 months.
30 seconds.
The mental health of staff and teachers that are working in our schools is at an all-time low. Teachers are struggling to meet the needs of students every day, often without any additional support. Support staff are trying to support more and more students who have the greatest of needs and do not have the bandwidth to support additional students. I need to speak about the value of human resources, and my last thing, I'll make it quick. Classroom assistants are members of the community that provide priceless social, emotional, and academic support to students every day. They are not low-hanging fruit.
Thank you.
They are mothers, fathers, engineers, and lawyers. They have chosen to work with all of our students for the most minimal amount of a salary, and in doing so, provide a big impact to our students, our teachers, and our staff.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Brittany Martinez, and I'm the art teacher at Blanchard. I'm just going to remind you of all the things that my peers have already spoke about, that if our unified arts educators' roles are being considered, then we need to make sure that we're considering the things that are not mentioned in the reports, the number of adapted classes that our unified arts classes are provided for our students, for our neurodiverse students. There are additional classes taught by our unified arts teacher, which provide the grade level teachers and coaches with time needed to analyze student data and plan for MTSS strategies. Many of our unified arts educators perform additional duties that allow our buildings to function. Outside of teaching the students, many unified art educators produce impeccable special programs, events for the communities, including art shows, choral concerts, and before and after school opportunities. If any form of the budget passes where unified arts educators are reduced in staffing, all of these items are also at risk of reduction or elimination. The alternative to eliminating these programs would be to increase the workload of our remaining unified arts educators, a workload that is actually comparable to the national average. Here are some facts concerning this. Although not impossible, a significant change in the unified arts roles and responsibilities would have to occur, which would break our contractual agreement of no more than 24 classes per week. The New Solutions K-12 report mentions that a full-time unified arts educator teaches 25 classes per week. The 2010 National Center for Education Statistics report shows that the average for classes taught per week by an elementary unified arts educator is 24 classes. But none of our unified arts staff are able to see students at a full-time capacity because of our half-day Wednesdays.
30 seconds.
The 2018 survey from the Art of Education notes that the national average of number of students taught per one arts educator is 373, and in that same survey, 70% of the art educators report they're the only art teacher working in their building. So whether these positions are on the docket to be cut this year or in future budgets, I urge you to recognize and consider that the change in our staffing numbers would result in a significant change to the high-quality unified arts education and opportunities for our students, or the workload and working conditions of our highly trained, dedicated, and passionate unified arts staff. Thank you.
Jason Fitzgerald, not a teacher, Flag Hill Estates, Acton. We're here again facing yet another budget crisis as we prepare to go through the annual exercise of cutting teaching FTEs from our payrolls. We have smart, accomplished, well-educated people in this town. Some are even Harvard educated, I've been told. And yet, I look at this report and I'm left shaking my head. The argument is made that ending open enrollment could cost our district as much as $800,000, followed by the acknowledgement that our open enrollment policy contributes to segregation of our student body. The $800,000 minus whatever savings from the bus routes, which I will get to in a moment, is less than 1% of the overall budget. Segregation alone should be enough to end the open enrollment policy. The claim is made that, I quote, in the districts with neighboring schools, there's no way to place students into empty seats. First of all, this would be easily solved by having overlap zones where new families are assigned to one or the other school. 742 Evergreen Terrace can be assigned to Conant today, while 5 years from now could be assigned to McCarthy Town for the next family. Better yet, merge the dual schools, McCarthy Town, Miriam, Gates, Douglas, and utilize the bigger building to get rid of this problem altogether. The idea that this is static forevermore is also ridiculous. There are 18 other things in this plan that are being changed, so clearly policies can be changed. Besides the problem of segregation, there are fallacies with the idea that families actually get to choose their school. One school may have 3 or 4 seats open, another school may, with an extra section, may have 26 open seats and get the majority of the students. If the process is truly random, a family from North Acton may put the Blue Ribbon School as their first choice, only to end up at their fourth choice in West Acton or even Boxborough, and spend an extra 10 minutes on a bus each way. Speaking of the bus routes, there are efficiencies to be gained, and as a taxpayer to the state and to the town, I'm interested in the district doing the ethical and honorable things and looking for savings on all expenses, including those reimbursed by the state. This plan also does not acknowledge the cost savings that would come from less overlapping bus routes. Sending multiple buses to Codman Hill Road in Boxborough, Canterbury Hill, North Acton, and to the end of High Street in South Acton is not efficient. As a parent who has 4 kids that go through Douglas for the last 13 years, it's hard for me to hear it said that the schools allow for their own personality. Douglas is not the same school that it was in 2012, with most of its character removed under the guise of equity. The personality of the school has been so stripped away it's hardly recognizable. In the end, it comes down to this. If open enrollment really is a cost savings, why is it not done everywhere? And why do we teach our kids about growth mindsets when it comes to this issue, we continue to be as narrow and closed-minded as possible? Please revisit this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dawn Masidi. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I just want to paint a little bit of a picture of what the MTSS process looks like from the perspective of a math specialist. So I am the math specialist at Conant. I was hired in 2022, just about 2.5 years ago. And when I was hired, one of the biggest assets that kept coming up during my interviews was that I had experience as a classroom teacher, noting the kind of lack of support that MTSS is supposed to provide. It is a state mandate, and as a classroom teacher for 20 years, I had been around when it was called RTI, and I've watched it progress through the years. I was really excited to see that math was being given a chance in Acton-Boxborough, and I left a district that I had been teaching in for over 15 years to come here to be a math specialist. When I came here, I was tasked with helping to create kind of sustainable programming or sustainable structures around MTSS at Conant. At the time, MTSS was kind of being dabbled with a little bit at Conant, but teachers weren't very comfortable with it yet, and there was definitely not like a consistent structure. For those of you who don't know, in the 2.5 years that I've been at Conant, I've worked under 3 principals. And so it's really fallen on 4 of us, myself, the math specialist, the reading specialist, and then the STEAM coach and the literacy coach, who are split between Conant and Blanchard. The 4 of us have really done a lot of work to create systems that work at Conant.
20 seconds.
And we're really proud of them. It's really taken 2.5 years for us to see some of the fruits of what we've done. And I think one of the greatest things that we do is every 6 to 8 weeks, we're looking at data to identify kids who would benefit from small group supports. So calling kids the kids who need math support and the kids who need reading support in a school kind of undermines the dynamic nature of what MTSS is designed to do.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
All right, I do want to take a moment and thank everyone who participated this evening.
Some people have trouble standing for half an hour. Let's have one more person, please.
I'm sorry, Vikram, we do need to move on with the meeting. We've been at
didn't
this for...
feel comfortable standing for a half hour.
I understand that. We've
I
been
don't
at this
think
for
you do.
51 minutes.
I don't think you do.
Thank you.
I think
We're going to
you're
move on
really
now.
Inconsiderate.
Again, before I was interrupted, I do want to thank everyone who came this evening. I recognize that not everybody had an opportunity to speak. I do encourage you to stay for the next part where the committee actually gets to deliberate this. This is not a done deal, but there are definitely lots of topics that the committee needs to discuss as part of this. With that, we'll move on to the superintendent's update. Peter.
All right, thank you, Adam. So first, for all of our staff, thank you for coming and sharing this. We'll talk more about that. I think, from a committee standpoint, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that everything we are now looking at having to cut has some kind of a significant impact. And we're not seeing anything that isn't going to have impact. And you're hearing that, I think, from staff. And I think that's absolutely noteworthy, and I wouldn't discount anything anyone's saying. I think that is what's probably presenting the biggest challenge for us in looking at, not only this year, but even the prospect of future years of reductions ahead of us. So, I just want to say thank you to the staff that came, spoke, absolutely recognize what you're saying and appreciate that you took the time to do that. I do want to give a couple updates before we jump into the report. I just want to start with a little gratitude for all of the volunteers at the Acton-Boxborough Resource Center. So we're deeply grateful for the generous donations we received during our AB Resource Center holiday gift drive. Thanks to the incredible support of our community, we collected a wide range of gifts, including toys, clothing, essential items, and we're able to ensure that 71 families and 156 children got to experience the joy and warmth of the holiday season. We had families coming in over the last several days to pick up those gifts. Very appreciative. Absolutely fantastic work by the whole army of volunteers that mobilized to get that done, so thank you. Also, just as a little bit of data, since October, the Resource Center Winter Coat Drive has successfully distributed 440 coats. Actually, this was written yesterday, and I saw several coats going out the door today. So more than 440 coats to individuals and families, ensuring warmth and comfort during those colder months. Once again, that is all made possible through the generous donations from the community, so we just want to express that gratitude at this point of the year. MCAS graduation requirement update. This is going to be an action item coming to the committee soon. I think, there was a lot of hope around the state that by ending the graduation requirement, it would actually maybe remove some bureaucracy from what kids had to do. We actually just got our guidance from DESE. It's going to create significant layers of bureaucracy at the district level that don't exist now, that we will actually have to create in terms of managing what that competency determination looks like. So just to portray it for school committee, there is our graduation requirements, but the state has a competency determination that students have to pass in order to receive a diploma. So it's actually 2 steps that students need to meet. The law that was passed didn't change anything about graduation requirements. It did affect the competency determination. It didn't take away the state competency determination, but it took away MCAS as the measure for the state competency determination. So whereas the state was actually tracking all of the students who passed MCAS in making that progress, and then we knew who was doing that, every district around the state now actually has to come up with separate competency determination criteria that we will have to report back to the state and monitor, in addition to having our graduation requirements. So this will hold true for the current seniors who have not yet passed MCAS. So if a senior already passed MCAS, they're held harmless, but we are going to have to figure that out for any remaining seniors. We will also have to look at that for all of our future years. And so I think there's going to have to be layers to the thought on this. Finally, we will have to have a process in place that anyone who formerly did not receive a high school diploma from our district because of MCAS will have an opportunity to meet our new competency determination requirement that we have in place once we determine it. And so, you know, we're actually talking about significantly more layers in the district that are going to have to take place now as a result of this. So that is going to be coming to the committee. We're going to have to do some really fast work because that has to be in place before students start to graduate this spring. So that will certainly be a springtime endeavor, and I just wanted to put that on your radar that it was coming up. Vision of a graduate, on the positive side, we've had over 2,400 members of our community, including our students, respond to that survey, so that's going well. We did have relatively low interest in doing the in-person workshop that we had scheduled for January 8th. We're actually going to postpone that at this point and try and redo that maybe a little bit later in spring when it's not right after a vacation. So more to come on that. Elementary Budget Task Force, I'm not going to talk about that now. You're going to hear about that momentarily. We did have our first meeting of our Superintendent and School Committee Student Advisory Council. That was great. Leela was there, as well as Jen Faber and Heather Stauch. And so at that, we brainstormed possible topics of interest to our students. We then took that brainstorm, sent it back out to students who participated in the Student Advisory Group as a survey to select a couple of priorities that they'd like to work on for the year. So we'll be working with them again on January 6th. We're also very excited on a separate note to bring in Dr. Stuart Ablon, who is a very well-noted speaker in the area of social emotional learning and mental health for students. He's going to be doing a parent workshop for us, for families around the district, called From Compliance to Collaboration, Combining Neuroscience, Common Sense, and Compassion. So we'll be sending out the date. That is going to be January 27th at 7:00 p.m. And that's a virtual presentation to make it a little easier for families. So lots of things happening right now, and look forward to after the vacation.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions or comments for Peter? All right. We will then move on to our guests and presentations for this evening, which is the Elementary Budget Task Force. Tori, I think you're leading us off this evening, yes? Great.
Yeah, so as Tori's getting ready, I'll just make a couple of preliminary comments here. So just for the committee to rehash kind of what we've already talked about. There are several processes all happening simultaneously this year in the development of the budget. I think, you know, one thing that the school committee talked about last spring as we got the override and recognizing the really narrow margin in the community that had support for the override, the need to have a process that we felt established trust with the community and a level of transparency that could help support the long-term financial support of the district within the community, and so that led to the establishment of this task force. We contracted with New Solutions K-12 to conduct a study. Nate Levinson from NSK K-12 will talk about the process as well as Tori, but they, you know, did stakeholder group surveys, met with individuals, looked at schedules, things like that, compiled them in order to make some recommendations to us. I know you've previously heard from NSK 12 as part of a budget workshop. So we'll be talking about that. Simultaneous to all of that work, though, the administration has to develop a budget as well. And the administration is kind of at the midway point of developing our budget. We present our budget to the school committee on January 30th. We've certainly heard from the budget task force, and we've been in the meetings with the budget task force, listening, taking notes, listening to understand kind of different perspectives of the community around what we need to do. But we also have to work with our principals and other staff to be able to then develop a budget that we present to school committee that we feel can operationalize the district in a way that takes place. The primary challenge that we have is we have a cap on the amount of money that we have to spend, and we can't spend more than that. And our role as an administrative team is that we have to come back to you with a budget that balances. So, you know, we're at a point where you're hearing from staff The cuts have been multiple years. It's making things more challenging for everyone. I don't want to portray this as any proposed reductions aren't creating more work for someone. And sometimes we even create reductions. You know, we talked about, you know, for example, a teacher shared with us the other day that it's more work for her just to get paper towels now because we reduced someone in the main office. And so in order to get paper towels now, they actually have to find a form, fill out the form, wait for someone to look at the form, and then get the paper towels delivered. So all of these things have a trickle-down effect on what we're doing. And at some point, no decision is not an option for us. And so that's the conundrum that we have. So I'm going to turn it over to Tori. She'll introduce the work of the task force, and then she'll introduce Nate. But I just wanted to preface that from a process standpoint, that it's really two processes running in parallel that eventually have to talk to you in some form of a budget recommendation that comes before the school committee, which then becomes your decision about how we move forward. So thank you. Tori, I'll pull up your slides, and then the clicker on the table will power the slides for you.
And forgive me, I've had a pretty good round of laryngitis this week, so hence I'm going to need the beverage.
Google just signed me out of the account.
So, as Peter mentioned, during Budget Saturday last February, we committed to engage with our community to look at opportunities for structural changes that might help our district save money. And our focus
consultant. And the main thing that I wanted to speak to tonight was the cutting of classroom assistants. I think it is an extremely short-sighted approach. I understand that you have to make cuts. I understand that this is a very difficult task. But as other people have already said, but I would like to underscore, they are your best bang for your pennies, not your buck, your pennies. You are paying them pennies on the dollar for what they do. They work extremely hard. They work in multiple classrooms. They establish relationships, and they are what is holding the elementary schools together right now. You cannot get enough subs every day to cover everything. You are using bus drivers to cover recess and lunch, and they are not able to do what classroom assistants have to do out there. And so right now, if you cut them by 25%, leave alone the 50% that was suggested by some, you are not going to be able to run your elementary schools. And I'm serious when I say that. You cannot cover everything they cover. You can't get all the subs to cover classrooms now. It's the assistants that are stepping in and piecemeal covering it every day. And please, whoever chose to include the terminology low-hanging fruit to refer to valuable members of our school community, it is appalling. I can't even speak coherently when I think about it. So please, look at what you are doing. If you really care about these students, keep the people who are truly helping them day in and day out with their social and emotional and academic learning.
Thank you. All right, Tori, go ahead.
All right, so as I was saying, we brought in Nate and New Solutions K-12 to do the research and analysis, not just because we lack the resources to do it ourselves, but also to give us an outside perspective from an experienced leader in both industry and education. Besides just helping us find savings, Nate's job was to challenge our assumptions. Just because what we've done in the past has worked doesn't necessarily mean we can't find ways to do it better. Besides 8 of the usual participants, school committee, FinCom, CPAC, the union, a principal, task force members also included community members, parents, educators, and students, 9 of which we selected using a rubric of diverse, desirable backgrounds and experiences, and then another 8 that were randomly invited to participate. Among our numbers were 2 high school students, Lucia Sabatelli and Gian Srijith, both full voting members who provided valuable input. Building the group this way was a new process, and I think it was highly effective. I'm going to add that I hear the feedback that some of you felt like you were not welcome or not invited. When we put our request together with the survey and asked for people to volunteer, one of the things we went out of our way to highlight was that we were looking for specials teachers as well. And I know that we sent some of the random invitations out as well. So not for discussion for now, but if somebody has feedback later on how we better get those invitations out so people see them, I would be willing to receive that. Tonight, you're going to hear the recommendations of these 25 community members for how our district can be more efficient and more effective. Let's start with efficiency. While we want to continue providing an excellent education for our students, we can't afford to keep doing things the way we've done them for the past 15 to 20 years. As I think you've figured out already, you're not going to like any of these options. But rejecting them is also not a choice. We have a $2.3 million shortfall. After 4 years, all choices involve structural changes, fundamental shifts in how we educate our students. One of the hardest realizations in this process was that changes in transportation and open enrollment aren't going to generate the savings we were looking for. Our transportation is actually very efficient and comprises only 0.3% of our budget, and open enrollment is actually saving us money. That's great, except now that means that we have to look back to staff and changing how they work to find those needed savings. So, in addition to those already in place, the structural changes that underlie tonight's recommendations include shifting from a 1 per school model to sharing some staff across schools, measuring need and allocating critical resources where they're most needed, rethinking our classroom staffing structure, and leaders prioritizing what is most important to continue, as well as identifying what we will stop doing because we no longer have the resources. And in order to do all of this, to share our staff effectively, this will require a major structural change involving moving all of our schools to a shared elementary school schedule. So if you've been following the task force's work, you've seen several iterations of the reactions, assumptions, concerns, and facts captured on chart paper as we work to make sense of the proposals and develop shared understanding. Doing this in a time-constrained open meeting environment with 25 people, a lot of us seeing this for the first time, was difficult for all involved. But as we've heard tonight, and as I've heard before, I know it was also really difficult for all of our educators to hear their work discussed in this way. And I know that I hear you, that you did not feel valued. And I am sorry. That is something that I will take away if we get to do this again in some sort of form, that we need to clearly talk to all of our members and understand what it is that we're doing in an open forum, because it's really hard when you're the ones that are being talked about. We wouldn't be having these conversations if we had any other choice. At the same time, I also want to say that I'm really grateful for everyone who participated through this really difficult open discussion and who came and provided feedback, because your input really matters. The quality of our work would not be the same without you, and the discussion would not be the same without you. As Peter mentioned, none of these recommendations come without consequences. And so, as requested by the Budget Subcommittee, our final round of concerns are shown in Appendix B, and they highlight the trade-offs and the issues raised by those who didn't support the recommendations that were brought forward. The efficiency part has been really painful, but I also appreciate that Nate kept a positive edge on this, and he pushed us to think about effectiveness. What can we do better? These recommendations aren't just about saving money. They're thinking about how we might do things better for students and staff. If staff reductions are necessary, we have to prioritize what truly enhances student outcomes and staff satisfaction. More quality student-facing time, and looking really hard at the efficiency of everything else that we do. That doesn't mean doing more with less. It does mean that we need to be very deliberate in how we allocate our time. We need to take things off the plate if needed, and we need to focus on what matters the most. Other districts have achieved this balance, and I'm confident that we can too. As we implement these changes, it's going to be important to carefully track the impact and to make adjustments as needed. So here are the cost-saving recommendations. If you include the 2 members who voted for 50% without voting for 25%, and so presumably would also support a 25% reduction, the task force was nearly unanimous in recommending that we repurpose 25% of classroom assistant funding to preserve other roles. We heard from educators in the room that they believe 50% would be the breaking point at which we would lack coverage for lunch, recess, and meetings. The task force was also nearly unanimous in recommending that we staff specials teachers according to the number of sections needed. This isn't to say that our specials teachers aren't working hard all day and that they aren't valued. They are providing extra classes beyond our program to students in school that have fewer general education classrooms, and this is beneficial for students. But it also means that students who attend large elementary schools don't have these opportunities. This recommendation is saying we should continue to provide our standard specials programming, but we need to look hard at everything else. The majority recommended math and reading specialist time with students be top priority, and then we take a hard look at the efficiency of the supporting preparatory work. Let's try hard not to get too hung up on the percentages here. The point we're trying to get after is that we're prioritizing what is important and the number of students served. And so then that brings us to equity-focused recommendations. Many of these are centered around the idea that a student with an identified level of need should receive the same support regardless of the school that the student attends. Since our schools have different numbers of students and also different numbers of students at varying levels of need who need support, this would involve sharing staff and a common means for determining student need. You'll notice task force consensus on several more recommendations for a reading and math specialists. Again, the desire to prioritize time helping students and support as many students as possible. The nuance here is that maximizing student-facing time and reducing the number of specialists only allows us to serve the number of students that we currently serve, while maximizing student-facing time and retaining all our specialists potentially allows us to serve more students. This is the sort of trade-off that we're facing. And clearly the task force preferred serving more students to cutting back on specialists, but this requires reductions somewhere else. Additionally, you see majority support for assigning counselors and STEAM and literacy coaches where they're most needed and prioritizing student-facing time for counselors. All these recommendations involve sharing staff to ensure a more equitable level of support across the district. A concern raised in this regard was workload. You've heard about maintaining relationships, also raised, and that sense of school community. Certainly, this would require thoughtful implementation to be successful. Finally, there is support for strengthening the unique characters of our schools within open enrollment while maintaining the quality of the curriculum. There were also some concerns raised, both in the task force and from the community at large, about how our schools' demographics are not necessarily reflective of the demographics of our community as a whole. So before I turn things over to Nate, I want to acknowledge that this process wouldn't have been possible without passing the override in Acton and the strong funding commitments from both towns. While we still have a shortfall, the support has at least allowed us the time to approach these changes thoughtfully. Districts with less support are having to make these decisions hastily and reactively, and that benefits no one. Vikram and I want to thank everyone who contributed, from the 700 survey responses, the hours of listening sessions, the data gathering and answering questions, the many public comments tonight, and the 25 members of the task force who worked so hard to review all this information. In putting the task force together, we intentionally sought diverse perspectives, and we're proud to say that despite our differences, we had meaningful and respectful conversations. If you haven't read the exit survey in Appendix B yet, I encourage you to do so. In today's climate of divisive discourse, these task force members truly set an example of how a community can come together to tackle tough problems. And with that, I will invite Nate to come up and join the crew.
Great, good evening. What I wanted to do is spend about 20 minutes giving you an overview and a little bit of background on what we found in our analysis. Before I get into any of the specifics, just want to echo a few things that have already been said, but really to know even as we went into this work, there were no unimportant roles, and we found no unimportant roles in our analysis. There were no time being poorly used, people not using time in the best possible way, given all that's been asked of them, and we didn't find that. And having completed the analysis and completed many hours of conversations, including with the budget task force, there really are no desirable reductions. There isn't a recommendation or an opportunity that we said, oh, you should do this, and you'd be crazy not to. The question, and that we didn't expect to find that, and we didn't find that, but that wasn't really the question we were asked to help you think through. If you have the money and do not have to make any of the changes in this report, that is probably a very prudent thing to do. If you don't have the money, we were asked to put forward some possibilities. And the term being an opportunity, it is something you should consider, something you should discuss. And I think the process that the district helped design of bringing together so many people, getting so many voices, was one of the best we have seen, and we have done this in many, many, many places. But it did not discover the obvious thing to do. It did not discover the painless thing to do. I think, and to be fair, sometimes we do find that. But this is not your first go-around at having to trim a budget. So if there were ever any of those painless decisions, they were made before we got here. So there really are no options that people are going to say, this is great. I think, I spent 6 years on a school board and then became a district administrator and had to go war with my prior self. These are only things that if you must do something, these are things you should discuss and think about. And ultimately, they're about value judgments, which is why I really appreciated having such a diverse group of stakeholders set the values. And that's certainly nothing that we as outsiders would want to tell you what you should value. And we just saw our role as helping put some facts in front of folks, put some data about how other people have wrestled with this, but ultimately it is your district and your values that need to drive how you will balance your budget. So I just wanted to set that as how we thought about this. The process is we did spend a fair amount of time trying to understand where you were financially, understand what had happened in the past, and collected a great deal of data. We spent the early fall trying to learn as much as we could and hear from as many people as possible. As Tori shared, we had about 700 folks respond to a survey. We did interviews and focus groups with nearly 100 people. When we collected the data and shared it back with the task force, there were some issues and questions. We collected the data and shared it back with principals who had issues and questions. The data went through 2, 3, sometimes 4 rounds of cleaning so that the task force could have the best possible information in front of them as they were asked to make some very, very difficult decisions. And when I said that nobody should enjoy making any of these decisions, I can definitely say nobody on the task force enjoyed making any of these decisions. Ultimately, we shared the findings with the task force, facilitated a number of rounds of conversations and structured thinking, and ultimately, the task force was asked to reflect their priorities against a range of options. I will say two things about the task force. One, potentially, and just to put this in perspective, I've worked in about 300 school districts in 30 states. It was the most civil and thoughtful set of conversations, not one night, but over 5 nights I've ever participated in. And civil, thoughtful conversations on a tough topic like this are extraordinarily rare. And I also saw something that I very seldom see, is a level of nuance of people really trying to think through, hey, if I liked this idea for math specialists, do I really like it for social and emotional support? And really trying to not take a blanket approach, but really looking at every option through its own lens. And again, something we don't always see. So again, it was as good a process as we have seen. Doesn't mean that they came up with easy answers. Do want to, pause for a sec before we get into some opportunities, but to really note a number of commendations, things that you should be very proud of. And again, this is proud of in part on a financial measure. There are many more things to be proud of. But one of the things we saw, which is relatively uncommon, is that with as many schools as you have, of many different size buildings you have, your elementary classrooms are currently staffed virtually perfectly to your existing class size targets. That there really wasn't a single instance in a single grade in a single school where you said, hey, you could have had one less section and stayed within your class size targets. In most school systems, people are pretty close to their class size targets, but they're never exactly there. There's almost 3, 4, 5 classrooms that you would typically find. We found none. So and we'll circle back to that, but we were very surprised at the beginning to see that. Surprised enough that when we saw it, we redid the analysis and wondered whether we had made a mistake, because we don't see that very often. Also wanted to acknowledge that the elementary schools have already taken steps in the past few years to reduce spending while preserving their academic programming and services. So you've already made 14.3 FTE reduction since 2023, which is, again, why it is not surprising to us that there are no easy decisions left. Wanted to highlight something that we saw and heard, and that the districts worked very hard to build consistency in curriculum and academic programming, which is unquestionably a best practice and often a critical element of districts that have tried to approach education with an equity lens, and at the same time tried to support allowing for some school autonomy and some school personality. That is always a tricky balance, but we saw in many ways that balance existing. We do have some recommendations for how you might go further, but definitely saw that complicated dance happening, and certainly where there has been some pressure to have consistency, these are in the places that really matter most from ensuring that every student, no matter where they live or which school they attend, is getting a high-quality education. And obviously, we saw throughout all of this, the district's got many talented, extraordinarily dedicated teachers and staff, deeply invested in their students, school, and community. There was a sense of pride of being part of Acton-Boxborough Regional School District that came through in many, many, many of our conversations. So what might you consider? We had 5 major areas that we looked at. I'm going to just walk quickly through each of them and then take any questions you have. The first recommendation or opportunity, and again, these are not recommendations. These were things we thought you should consider and the task force should consider, The first was to adjust staffing of non-classroom roles from a one-per-school approach to an equity formula that matches staffing to students' needs in a more targeted way. There are two parts to this recommendation. One is, since resources are tight, you want to make the most impact out of every dollar you are spending, out of every person, every talented person you have. And from a equity perspective, ensuring that no matter what school I go to, I have the same amount of support, the same likelihood of getting support. This is just a for example. And again, much of your staffing is done on what we would refer to as a one-per-school model. But it means that if you are a student who struggles to read, you have one reading teacher to help you across that building. And some of your schools have over 200 kids who are struggling to read, others about 70. Quick footnote, different people will use different measures to determine how many kids struggle. And we could have used 2 or 3 different measures. We've actually looked at 2. The range of roughly 3 times as many at one school versus another seemed to hold constant regardless of the measure. This is looking at reading. We saw similar in math. And what we have seen across the country, if you are one of 200 or one of 70, the level and intensity of support you will get is likely different. And again, interesting with math, the range moves to almost 4-fold difference. You have other roles that this applies to, and you can see that in the report. The second opportunity to think about is expanding the reach and impact of interventionists, counselors, and coaches to serve more students. This is a more nuanced possibility, but again, you invest in incredibly talented people. What we heard from principals, from staff, is you need more of them. And if you could afford more of them, we would absolutely suggest you get more of them. There's no suggestion in this that you are overstaffed in any of these areas. It would be a benefit to have more. That said, if more are not coming, how do you get the most impact out of these roles? And there are really 2 levers that I want you to think about. The first lever is, we'll stick here for a moment. The first lever is how much time do they spend in a day working with kids? We have done what we call schedule sharing I think we're up to about 90,000 educators across about 140 districts. And what we have found is, here like everywhere, folks in these roles are asked to do a lot, and which is not surprising since they're really talented people. They're asked to work with kids, they're asked to support teachers, they're asked to do planning, they're asked to sit in on student assistant meetings, the MTSS process. There are a lot of things they're asked to do. They do it, and there's even more things people would like them to do. All of those are really good things. Not one of it would we say we saw a wasted minute. The question is, if you can't do everything you want, to what extent can you prioritize their time with students? There's definitely a question. We've worked with some districts that have aspired to hitting about 75% of their time with students. As we've looked at your contract, as we've looked at your Wednesday schedule, as we looked at when the kids come and when the kids go, we don't believe 75% is achievable. We do think probably 65% might be achievable. We think some folks are probably there or very close to there, and others not yet. But I want to be very upfront with you all. The amount of time they can spend with kids, particularly given your Wednesday schedule and when kids arrive in their workday, it could increase a little. It will not increase a lot. The flip side is, how many kids do they work with at a time? And as we have been revising and scrubbing these numbers and getting more updated numbers, we do see more of an opportunity to thoughtfully increase the group size in which kids are being supported for small group instruction. And you'll see it in the report, but the group sizes run between 2.5 and 3 kids, which is nice. If it was my son or daughter, I'd like that. Except we've seen overwhelming research and experience that the research says groups of 4 or 5, if you're grouping by similar area of need, meaning 5 kids with the same challenge, not 5 kids with 5 different challenges, are highly effective. And the difference there is you can help a lot more students. So we are seeing more and more school systems say if we have greater needs and more kids who need the need and an inability to increase staff, we will thoughtfully manage group size and, to the extent you have the possibility, thoughtfully manage all the other things folks are being asked to do. Now, as a board who thinks about budgets, and I'm very glad I'm no longer on a school board, there are really 2 different ways you can think about those variables. Let's assume you said, hey, we're going to increase the amount of time with kids and we're going to increase group size so we can help a few more kids. There are just simply 2 possibilities when you do that. You could say, hey, we're going to serve the same number of kids we are today, and we'll do that with less staff. That saves you money. Or you could say, hey, we're going to serve more kids with the same staff we have. That gives you more services without spending any more money. One is neither better nor worse. That is your value judgment and what the financial pressures allow or not. But both of those options are available through both of those levers. And again, to be really clear, managing the group size will have a far bigger impact than whether we get 10 percentage points more of the day with kids or not. The third opportunity to consider is to examine the need for general education classroom assistants at the elementary schools. Again, if you can afford them, they add a great deal of value, and your schools are absolutely built. If you think about lunch and recess, the way your schools currently run, you will need at least half the classroom assistants, as they are classroom assistants and they are lunch coverage and they are recess supervision. So we did not see an easy, or there's not a path to saying eliminating all of them, because then you're going to have to backfill some other way. That said, and I think it was fairly surprising for some on the task force. Again, worked in about 300 school districts. I can definitely count on one hand the number of districts today that still have elementary general education classroom assistants. And I think some of the task force were very surprised by that. Let's say you've had them for a long time. They are a bedrock to how you do things. Almost all school systems have simply said, not that we don't value them, we don't want them, but almost all school systems have said, we do not have a budget that could support that. And as a role that we have seen most folks have to pare back or eliminate completely. You've got roughly 900 hours, an investment of about $650,000 in general education classroom assistants. And again, about half of them pretty deeply embedded in coverage for lunch and recess. Number 4, which obviously generates a lot of anxiety, consider staffing specials teachers more closely to workload guidelines by utilizing partial, shared, or multi-hat FTE. I want to explain 2 things about this. Your current strategy of staffing is a 1 per school. I would say if we were having this conversation 25 years ago, almost all the districts we worked with staffed 1 per school. And for all the reasons you heard tonight, there are benefits to that. Benefits to culture for the staff, benefits to culture for the building, relationships built with students. I would say that today we see maybe certainly less than half of the school systems we work with, including districts like your own, at a one per school, and we are seeing across the country a fairly rapid movement away from one per school as budgets have gotten tighter and tighter. So this is an area in which a lot of school systems across the country are having to look at, not because they want to, but because they have to. And there are really three different strategies people are using. One says, hey, partial positions, meaning we're going to have a 0.6 here and a 0.8 there. And there are districts who have been able to hire people who want those kind of jobs. Others have said, hey, no, we want full-time people. We want the people we have who want full-time jobs, and we will maintain that. We won't maintain all the positions, but we'll maintain them all as full-time by having them move across buildings. And the third strategy we've seen is something that's called wearing multiple hats. So we've seen, for example, where a person might be the librarian for 0.7, which is what you needed to cover, and they would be a 0.3 reading teacher, but not an increase in reading teachers, but if there was capacity or somebody left as a reading teacher, they would fill that in. So you've essentially created a full-time position out of two part-time positions. What we saw, and you probably know that your schools are of different sizes. So if you are a specials teacher in a school with 23 classrooms, you teach 23 sections, and if you're in a school with 18, you teach 18. That said, your staff is incredibly dedicated, they're incredibly hardworking. Not want to suggest that in places with smaller schools, people are just sitting around because they got an hour and a half every day with nothing to do. That's not true. They have added coverage, perhaps more class. They have definitely found other things and other ways to help. And if you were to reduce, some of those other things will go away. We're very clear, though, what will not go away in places that staff very precisely or share. You're not reducing 1 minute of art or 1 minute of PE that was built into your schedules. So from a student perspective, they're still getting access to those same courses in the same quantity, but clearly a bigger difference for the staff delivering those services. And that, if precisely staffed, is about a $500,000 opportunity. Also, I want to point out one other thing about this is there is a good way and a bad way to share staff. We have worked with many school systems that share staff in fairly chaotic, pretty frustrating for teachers, pretty frustrating for principals. And we've also been in districts where they've shared staff and it runs smoothly, the jobs are doable and sustainable, and it really has to do with you need unified schedules, you need unified scheduling. You cannot have 6 people build 6 schedules and then try to get people to move between them. So there really does take a very high level of collaboration and organization to share staff in a humane and effective way. And not every school district we work with pulls that off. The last opportunity was definitely a surprise to us. The single most recommended, I think of the 700 people who responded, over 400 said, oh, I know how to balance your budget. Get rid of open enrollment. Case closed. It is without a doubt, and I think amongst the task force at our first meeting, where we just asked for people's thoughts, they reflected that thinking as well. But honestly, we had no reason to doubt that. So there's another analysis we did probably 3 times because what we found was there's not an opportunity to save any money through open enrollment. First of all, your transportation is efficient as transportation is measured. When I talk about efficiency, I'm not talking about that you've mastered every route so that a bus does not go past the same house or 3 buses don't go past the same house every morning. Efficiency is measured by how many drivers and buses do you need, and to a large degree, how many hours are you on the road. You had a report done a few years ago that said you were very efficient. We ran our own analysis, and we said you were very efficient. But here's the weird part. Even if you were not efficient, but you are efficient, it's not that important, because as a regional school system, you have a very high level of reimbursement. So you are seeing your total transportation costs of about $300,000. So if you eliminated all transportation, which you cannot, you would save about $300,000, which is smaller than most of the other opportunities we've put forward. And you're not going, I mean, the other thing that gets even more interesting, remember I told you we ran the analysis multiple times because we couldn't quite figure out how every elementary school had exactly the right number of classrooms. But then we finally understood, took us a little while, that the way open enrollment works is, yes, you do get to pick the school you want to a limit. And if you come after kindergarten, you only get to pick a school that had an open seat. That is generally considered the holy grail of staffing elementary schools. And there are a small number of schools, typically in districts that have extraordinarily tight budgets, where they do things like that to get that super high level of efficiency. So if you look at open enrollment compared to just traditional neighborhood schools, we estimate that if you had just traditional neighborhood schools, that would cost you between $400,000 and $700,000 more. So open enrollment is not your biggest cost driver. It is actually saving you money, but very few people knew that, and I'm not sure how many people will believe that. We believe it. That said, the one other thing I want to mention is there was also a lot of concern when it came to open enrollment about, one, have the schools lost some of their differences, and two, the socioeconomic and particularly the racial makeup of the schools was a concern to many. And the data supports that your schools are not all mirroring the communities as a whole. And so there is a potentially recommendation, not from a financial point of view, but to revisit how do you get what you wanted out of open enrollment and get that in a way that is, reflects your values of equity, but we did not see a financial opportunity. Two things to put on the table, then I'll stop, is based on not on our research, but based on all of our interviews, including folks inside the system, that if you needed to look at things for future years, I hope you don't have to, but a number of people said, hey, why aren't you looking at, we think there might be an opportunity around special education services and staffing, whether it was to spend less or to spend more efficiently. It's a TBD, but that certainly came up. And again, a number of folks said, we do have a lot of initiatives in this district. Are they all really as successful as we hope? And potentially is an opportunity to do some investigation to say, hey, are we getting the results we want from other initiatives? But these were two things we did not look at, but promised to pass along. With that, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Nate. I think what I'd like to do for the committee is go around and give everybody an opportunity first to ask specific questions about Nate's presentation and the findings, and then we'll move into sort of comments and deliberation. So if you can hold your comments to the second round, we'll start first with just questions and clarifications on the report and the presentation. Yenshin.
Thank you, Nate, Tori. I have a question. Nate, I really loved your book, but my question is that when the task force found early in the process that open enrollment actually saves money rather than, as a budget cost, why didn't the scope of the study expand to the other two levels, which is the junior high and high school?
One, because it's a vastly larger and different scope, and the task force learned of and our analysis completed we were 90% through the study.
Hi, thank you. I do have a lot of questions, but I guess I'll just start with one. Can you sort of address the point that was brought up by numerous people during public participation that the data is off, that some time that teachers are using to cover MTSS meetings and other things like that were not accounted for?
One, the data has been reviewed by principals multiple times, by every, certainly reading specialists and every math specialist submitted their data twice. It's been reviewed at least 3 times as well. I think there's a difference between the data being wrong and the data being analyzed in different ways. So I'll give you 2 examples. If I'm a elementary art, music, PE teacher, we said that given the schedules you have built and given the expectation that every classroom goes to a special once a week, that's how much specialist time you need. That is not to say that if they're in a school that had extra capacity, that they didn't step in to do other things. That is true. And I will say that 98% of the districts we work with, art, music, and PE teachers are not covering MTSS meetings. And if you are, and some are, you would have to find a different way to do that. So I think there's a difference in what we were counting. What we've counted is the way most school systems would look at it, and it is certainly something that is a reasonable way if you wanted to move in that direction. Second example would be where a different way of looking at the numbers is, so the question is, how much time could a reading teacher, reading specialist work with kids? And the question would be, the kids aren't available on Wednesdays, part of Wednesdays. So that should come out of the calculation. And that's one way to look at it. We have other districts that would say, hey, if there are no kids around Wednesday, that's the time you're going to get all your paperwork done. And so when the kids are in the building, you're not going to do paperwork at that time. And you've got contract time that's before the kids are there. That would be when you do some meetings and collaboration. Now, that is not the norm currently. That is a norm in some systems. So I think we've tried to be very explicit about how we calculated things. And different people, different smart people, would make different assumptions as to what's reasonable and possible.
Hi. One thing that I had noticed is in the open enrollment section, you did sort of put a figure on how much extra it would cost us.
Yeah.
Do you have any figures or estimates? Like I know we have percentages, but do you have any estimates on what the proposed opportunities could potentially be saving or allocating back into the budget that could be used elsewhere? Does that make sense?
No, I didn't follow the question.
I'm just kind of looking for, a potential figure for what the opportunities could be saving or putting back into the budget if we were to make the proposed cuts.
Sure, and again, I think in the report we've called out, and in the task force, as they were looking at different options, that the dollar figures were there.
Okay, perhaps I missed those and we'll have to go back. Thanks.
Other questions? I have one, and it's for both Nate and Tori, and it's kind of in response to what we heard early on. I've looked through all the materials. I'm just responding to this comment that has made it out that at some point, faculty or staff in our schools were referred to as low-hanging fruit. And I'm just curious where that might have come from. Was there anything in the reports or the conversations or any documentation that exists? Because I agree, it's completely inappropriate. But I also, when I did a quick find through all of the documents that are on our packet, I don't see that phrase anywhere. So I'm just curious if that was anything that ever got documented somewhere. Page 10 of the report.
Well, I can speak to that.
Please.
So one of the things, obviously, because it's an open meeting, we have to keep minutes of meetings. And during the meeting, some of the meetings, we did a variety of activities where some were dialogue that could be captured. by people listening to the meeting, and others were written activities where people were writing thoughts that they may have as an individual. And the goal of that was actually to allow people to get out different types of thinking, particularly people who had concerns about different reductions. I believe that that was a comment by an individual that was captured in writing on one of the activities. And so, you know, as we developed minutes, we needed to fairly capture that. And I think one of the things we were sensitive to is when you have an open meeting, you can't really censor what is being shared during that meeting, and kind of that under that like offensiveness standard. There's no doubt that a comment like that is going to be perceived as offensive by people. I think the challenge is once it's said or it's written as part of that formal record of the meeting, it's really challenging because we can't choose what we edit out or what we keep there. And so, you know, I think it's important to understand the context that it's not a representation of the full group or the district position on something, but it's a reflection of what was said and done during a meeting.
Thanks for that clarification. And I think I speak for the committee as a whole where we found that quite offensive, and we do not support the term of calling anybody who works in this district low-hanging fruit. And I apologize for that comment on behalf of the task force and on behalf of the committee. One more round of questions. Becca, you had one more? You had a bunch more?
I do have a bunch more, but I know we're going to keep discussing this also. I guess my next question would be, how tightly have you sort of decided a person's schedule should be, you know, the time should be allocated? So I saw, obviously, you know, travel time between buildings, proposing teachers go from one building to another. Obviously, that needs to be taken into account. I'm just trying to imagine, has that actually been worked out, the math of Kelly's Corner has a project going on. There's, you know, all sorts of times when different intersections get gunked up. It's really easy to get, you know, around buildings on this campus, but to go to Conant, from Conant to Blanchard, that's difficult, you know, reliably. So I'm just wondering, you know, even also like in terms of meeting coverage and such, there's times that teachers can't go to the bathroom. So I'm just wondering how we're expecting to find efficiencies. And I guess I take issue with that word.
So I'll come back to two thoughts. The first is there's always a good way and a bad way to share staff. And I said that. And, you know, good ways take into account. I mean, you do have some schools that are extraordinarily close to each other. A bad way is to randomly assign where folks are going to travel from and to. You know, a bad way is having people, and I've seen all of these things, where people are traveling from one school to another and back to that other school because that's the way they built the schedule. So any good idea or any idea can be implemented poorly. I will say the other point is that there are roughly, just to give you some sanity check of, and not saying you will like this, but I'm saying there are about 100,000 elementary schools and about, no, it's 65,000 elementary schools, about 65,000 elementary schools in America, and about 30,000 of them today had staff move between buildings. This is something that people learn to do. In the places that have done it for 20 years, quite honestly, there's never been a discussion of stopping to do it. There have certainly been lots of discussions of how to do it well. So we have certainly seen many places share staff between buildings in a thoughtful, reasonable, good for staff way. And we've seen many do it very poorly.
Ben?
So I have a comment and then a question. So do you want me to hold off on it?
We're going to go to comments anyway, so okay. You're up first.
I have concerns about this proposed program and the changes to staffing in our elementary schools, specifically related to the equity model for our specialists. The report highlighted that the current structure where each school has a reading and math specialist is already insufficient to meet the needs of our students. The proposal to reallocate specialists across schools risks reducing support levels already super thin at this point, leaving some schools then with less than one full-time specialist for math or reading, which could also limit a student's access to essential support and hinder effective decision-making. My question is, as we heard tonight, there is significant concern over the implementation of this program as proposed. How do we ensure that we address those needs in an equitable format to ensure that our specialists across our schools are doing their work without compromising the effectiveness of MTSS and reducing student access to these essential programs?
So-
I know I'm asking the million-dollar question.
No, but I have no horse in this race. It's not my district. I had plenty of opportunity to run one and to guide one. I've known this district for a number of years. I have known that you've had an incredible commitment to equity, long before that was actually the thing most districts did. And I've always admired that. I was actually just very surprised when we saw the data that you were in a fairly advanced state of a district committed to equity, still applying a one-per-school staffing model. I mean, I've written about it, others speak about it. When people talk about equity, one of the first examples usually given is a one-per-school staffing is generally considered equal, the exact opposite of equitable. So if you have a very unequitable system today, because if I am in a school with 200 kids who struggle to read, it is worse for me that I chose a school that had more kids, 199, who also struggle to read. Had I chosen a school that had only 69 other kids struggling to read, I would get more help, more often help, or help in a smaller group. So I think the question for you to wrestle with is which type of inequity, or how do you minimize the inequity? But you have inequity today in one of the most textbook examples of inequity. My 2 cents would be that if you wanted to minimize inequity, the first thing you have to do is have an objective measure of how much need there is in each building. And I think for reading and math, that's really easy. It's interesting, we've worked with systems that have put in measures around social, emotional, and mental health needs. The task force had a really interesting take that for the counseling support, that maybe it was so important to have both the relationships and to have somebody there in case of a crisis, that maybe there was good counter-argument to why a little bit of inequity of hours of service would be something that was valuable when it came to social, emotional, and counseling. If I'm a student who struggles to read, not getting the reading support I need, or a student who struggles in math, not getting the math support I need, seems inequitable. The best solution, if you could afford it, put 2 in every building. At least it's better. It's still inequitable, which I don't believe you can afford. The intermediate solution says, hey, let's have a clear measure of where the need is, assign staff based on need, and to the extent that it is practical, go to group sizes that align to the research, which would be 5, and to the extent that it is practical, take some things off the plates of these folks if they're not with kids, so they can spend, if they can, more time with kids. Again, but I do think that the 2 biggest levers are having a measure of need and managing the group size so that they can help as many kids. But, I mean, these are hard. I mean, there's no obvious or simple answer, but I do think an honest assessment is there's some inequity already.
Hi. I wanted to ask, you know, in exploring ideas that were sort of like out of the box, things that people hadn't done before, I'm interested why the idea of bigger class sizes with more assistants wasn't explored, and to sort of jump on the back of what Ben was saying in your response to that. You'd said earlier that data on larger small group sizes might actually be helpful for student learning, so I'm just wondering how that pairs with reading specialists it not being like an equitable split and your idea that actually small groups are better for student learning.
So two different things. So to save a single classroom, you are going to have to add 5 kids to your average class size. So what we would normally do in a study like this, if there was money to be saved by larger classes, something we do look at, we've said, hey, if you added 1 kid to your average class, this is what you could save. If you added 2 students, this is what you could save. Occasionally, we will say, hey, if you added 3 students, this is what you could save, knowing very few communities will add 3 students, but some will add 1 or 2. When we did that analysis, even at 4 kids, we weren't finding any savings. So the fact that it was going to get up to class sizes that are so different from what you have today, it didn't seem a worthwhile recommendation. And that is only possible because you have this very efficient way of filling up your classes through the open enrollment process. So that's why that option wasn't there, because it didn't actually exist within reason.
So, Becca, I think what you're suggesting we actually talked about last year during the budget process, that was our worst-case scenario budget. And I think, you know, there's 2 ways to approach increasing class sizes. One way, which I think Nate's talking about, assumes that you're keeping kids in the same school that they attend. And so if you have 3 elementary classrooms and you say you're going to increase the class size at that grade level, you have to figure out how to divide one of those classrooms at 20 students between the 2 remaining classes. And you have increased class sizes to such an extent that it's not really feasible. The thing that we were approaching in a worst-case budget scenario was the notion that we would actually have to transfer kids all around the district. And ultimately, last year, we determined that that was absolutely not in the best interests of students to be transferring students, you know, kind of randomly just in order to balance class sizes across the district and grow that. I think one of the, you know, challenges of the open enrollment process, it's not a challenge of open enrollment, but one of the challenges is once you have kids programmed into schools, it's really hard if you already start with balanced class sizes within the guidelines to gradually increase class size. The only way to do that is to start with kindergarten and really think about how you're programming your kindergartners across the district and new students that move in and grow class size slowly over a period of years. Otherwise, you're ending up in an incredibly disruptive, you know, place for students and families. So I think that's the challenge of balance.
I think my point in connecting the 2 thoughts is that we seem to be a little bit all over the place in terms of what's best for students in terms of class sizes and small group sizes. We can't say on the one hand there's data to suggest that larger small group sizes of 4 to 6 kids might be beneficial, and yet it's better to have, you know, the lowest number of ratio of kids per reading specialist. And on the other hand, we're tied down to, you know, a class size idea that we've, you know, been having as a policy for a while. I'm just wondering, like, how do we decide on exactly what we're discussing here and what's best for students? Because I'm getting mixed information.
I can answer that. So, you know, and Nate and I talked about this in part of our conversations. His report assumed school committee policy as the class size guidelines. And so when he talks about the balance of our class sizes within school committee guidelines, is the administration running the district the way the school committee told us to? That's agnostic to whether or not adding 2 or 3 students to a class would materially degrade the quality of education. And so, you know, I think, you know, my own reading of research is changing class size by 2 or 3 students, whether you go up or down, is not going to significantly change the overall experience. It doesn't make it easier for teachers. I want to be clear about that. But it doesn't significantly degrade the outcomes that you get for kids. In order to significantly improve or degrade outcomes for kids, I think you'd have to probably increase average class sizes by like 5 or 6 students, and that's where you start to really see an impact one way or another. Nate, I don't know if you see the same thing.
Hold on just a sec, because I think the question that Becca's asking isn't just about class sizes, it's about class sizes and then intervention sizes, where we talked about some of those interventionist groups going from 2 to 3 to 5 to 6. Am I right? Yeah, so I think the question really is, how are we saying that adding 2 or 3 more kids in a general education classroom could be significant, but on the other hand, we're saying in these intervention sessions, adding 2 or 3 more kids doesn't change the outcomes much.
So let me be very clear. Going from, say, 3 to 5 kids in a intervention group, if you're grouping by similar area of need, the research is clear and overwhelming that that's okay. It is also true that given your relatively small class sizes, if you added 2 or 3 kids to every class in this district, academically, that's okay. That's the research. I know very few teachers, very few principals, very few parents believe that research, but it is 30 years of research that adding a few kids to the class sizes you have would have no impact on their outcomes. Your dilemma is, at least from our analysis, is that's actually not an option. You would have to be adding 4 or 5, and even with that, that is not a lot of money, but we've seen virtually no community add 4 and 5 students. It's interesting, last thought on class size, is we work with districts, say, in and around Minneapolis, St. Paul, that are demographically identical to Acton-Boxborough. They do not have an elementary class without 24 to 26 kids. They do not have a middle school class without 28 kids. And many have 30. And they think that's totally normal. And they're not mad, they're not angry, but try to add 3 kids to any of those classes, and you will see the school committee room with 500 parents in it. What we have seen across this country is people get used to something. And it is not because the research said you're at the right place, but you're used to something. It did not seem realistic in our experience that adding 4 and 5 kids, particularly since, we give you this trade-off, because ultimately if you have to make a choice, increasing class size by 4 students or having specialists, art, music, PE, share buildings are financially about the same. We've just seen no district, in our experience, add that many kids to elementary classes, and so it didn't seem like an option to put forward. If it was 1 or 2, we absolutely would have, and have in many similar situations, put that option forward for the committee.
Thank you. All right, time for comments. You have a question? Okay, go ahead. And there's a follow-up question from Liz as well, so we'll go Leland and then Liz.
Could you just clarify the process for me a little bit? I did read what you wrote. So I understand that you came in to gather data and then analyze it once there were findings from the data analysis. I'm curious whether the process was kind of, for the task force, was choosing from a range of options provided by your team, or to then, other option, look at the data and then make meaning of that and then come to some variety of options?
Multiple paths. So what we did is essentially 3 things. In every focus group with both the community and internal staff, one of the questions was, what are the things you think we should look at? Where do you see potential opportunities that should be analyzed? So that factored into our work. We obviously brought our own experience, and the very first meeting with the task force, we asked again, where do you think things should be looked at? And interesting, there was a fair amount of overlap, but we looked for opportunities from the focus groups, from our own experience, and from the task force. And then shared with the task force a number of weeks later the analysis of what we found.
Okay, so for clarity purposes, when we asked folks in focus groups and then in the task force where they think solutions might come, that was without any sort of understanding of what the data had actually shown. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then second question, I don't know if it's to you or to Tori, but my recollection was that in the beginning, when we discussed that folks would be logging their hours, it felt like integral to that process was the understanding that we then wouldn't turn around and use it as a case to eliminate positions. And so I understand that like we are in a less than ideal financial position, but I'm curious if that kind of guiding value shifted during the process.
So you heard me comment that probably one of the hardest things for me to see come back was that the things that we started out looking at, open enrollment and transportation, weren't going to save us anything. Yeah. So first of all, nobody in the task force was in a place that they would be making recommendations about roles, and nor we, really. A lot of that is an operational thing that happens at the district level. But yeah, looking at collecting data, and I can see absolutely how on this end of things it feels, I would look at that and I would be like, wait, you asked me for this and now you're telling me that I should do my job differently or my job should be less somehow. Yeah, was that our intention going in? No, not at all.
Leela, I think the original intention of actually looking at all those schedules was under that equity side of the work, and really looking at how do we maximize our specialists and different roles times with students and serve the most students. I think the challenge is superimposed with trying to look at that. There's also, a $2-something million deficit to start with. And so the reality of all the work we want to do of equity, if we had the money, we would actually increase the staff in a more equitable way and start with kind of 1.0 for every school and then be adding to get to the student needs we want. That would be the goal. The challenge is when your resources are starting at -2 million, that becomes unfeasible. And so you also still have to look at, if we're going to have to reduce staff, how are we going to serve the most kids possible, even if we have to reduce staff? So I think, there's just an inherent challenge with facing a deficit that you can't hide from. And quite honestly, I think what we thought about was you also can't tell the task force they're only thinking of it from an equity lens, and then all of a sudden, administration's going to have to make some choices about what we're doing in a budget. You kind of have to be clear about that intention from the start. But when we started this task force process, we didn't know we were looking at a $2 million deficit either. So that's probably where the challenge is at.
I understand that we have very intentionally limited our scope to elementary, and I don't know if this is a question for you, Peter. One comment that gave me pause tonight was the idea that reducing specials for elementary would have a negative impact on the preschool. What would be the impact on the preschool if we were to move forward with that? Would there be an impact, or is it not going to affect them?
I think ultimately it depends. We were able to add preschool specials probably, I'm going to say really when we opened the new campus. Prior to that, there were no preschool specials. So, we're required to provide the specials for elementary, but not for pre-K. It's actually, unusual for pre-K students to have access to it, but it's something good that we do. So, I can't tell you what the outcome is until we actually finish a budget process and look at what's going to happen. But I think, the challenge is, as we move from the first to the second to the third, now to the fourth, and with the prospect of a fifth and or sixth year of budget challenges, we're being put in a position where we're no longer doing the things we want to do, but we're more and more having to set a baseline of what are we required to do and be really selective about anything that happens beyond that. So I can't tell you that we can continue them. I can't tell you that we can't continue them because we're not there yet from an administrative standpoint, but that is certainly something that could very well be on the table if we have to.
So just sort of.
Wasn't me.
Okay. Just to go off Becca's thing, the increase from 3 to 5 in these groups. You're saying the research definitively shows that this is actually not bad, in fact, can be productive. I'm curious, how does that occur within that group? I know it's a sort of very specific question, but I'm really curious, because you're saying the data really does show this, but I'm just asking how.
The research shows that if you group kids what's called by similar area of need. So let's just take 2 examples. I've got a group of 3 and I've got a group of 5. And you would think, logically, 3 has got to be better than 5. If it is a either randomly selected group or a group that was selected because they were all in Mrs. Smith's class, that could be 3 kids, 1 struggling in phonics, 1 in fluency, and 1 in comprehension. In the places that thoughtfully manage larger groups, you get 5 kids who are struggling in phonics. I will tell you, in the district that I led, the reading teachers, classroom teachers were so enamored with this strategy that they actually would create a group of 5 kids struggling in diphthongs and reform the groups every 7 days, because they just saw so much value to having what is considered a very narrow focus. And as a result, you're getting, as a student, 30 minutes of diphthongs for the next 7 days, as opposed to 10 minutes of phonics, and then also, not that it was completely not useful, but 10 minutes of fluency and 10 minutes of comprehension. So the research has said that you can do a great lesson, a highly focused lesson, if there are systems in place to group the kids with very similar needs. And very good results have come from that.
Essentially doubling the number of kids who are being helped, almost.
Yeah. Yep.
I have a comment and a question. I think a few months ago, I spoke on a record when I saw the meeting schedule for the task force that on a Tuesday evening, I was actually watching Mr. Brendan Ferrari's children. They were right there in the audience. When we schedule meetings at those times, I think I set the time, we're eliminating people's opportunity to participate and their voices. That's my comment. My question is that in this whole entire process, have the budget task force thought about or are aware of our school district's goal? Our district's goal number 1 is improve social, emotional, and mental and behavioral health outcomes for students by shifting our environments, practices, and supports so that students can more effectively access learning and cultivate constructive relationships. Speaking of mission, vision, value, our vision is to develop engaged, well-balanced learners through collaborative, caring relationships. Are we confident that with these recommendations, if they were accepted and implemented, we can still cultivate relationships?
So, can I give you an Army reference? So, for those who don't know, Yenshin and I share some Army background. I think this is a really hard one. We've heard a lot of people talk about the importance of our school cultures and of relationships and of knowing our kids and what happens when you're spread out. And I guess I would offer the perspective of somebody who was put into one of those roles where I had to learn how to plug in. In the Army, we have what we call enablers. They're the assets you have that are so expensive or so specialized, you can't put them in every unit. I used to be an intelligence officer, and I had intelligence troops, and we weren't in every little unit. So we were held at a higher level until a mission came up that we were needed for, and then we would go and we would plug in. And it was actually a skill that you developed to be able to go and plug in, to be able to develop a relationship very quickly with somebody. And you hoped like heck the person on the other end was ready to share that relationship with you. It better be a good sergeant major or first sergeant who you plugged in with and was happy to see you and would take care of you. And you were that unit's for the duration of whatever mission was that you had. And then you went back to your home unit and that you'd done your thing, right? I think there are other ways to think about it. I think it is hard for us to think about it right now. I think the one thing that I do have a lot of faith in, though, is that we have some really amazing district leadership, that we have people who recognize this problem, we have people who have surfaced this problem, and if it's the direction that we have to go, we have the time to sit down and talk about how to do it deliberately and how to figure out how to make it as good as we can. Am I confident? No. Did I hear everybody in that room who is boots on the ground involved in teaching raise those concerns? Absolutely. But again, we are in the position where we're making hard decisions, and I think you're right to bring it up, and I think we're all right to acknowledge it's something that we have to tackle if that's the direction we have to go.
Can I just add really quickly? I appreciate what you shared. I also appreciate the military connection we have. I used to be a tutor at West Point, but I think you had just compared a scenario where soldiers were trained for war, and these are educators who are trained to teach.
So, soldiers train for a lot of things, and it's not all involving fighting. My first job was a peacekeeping role.
So I'm gonna sort of play off Yanshin, your question as well. I think the answer is it's not the mission and the vision and the values remain the same. How they look and how they get delivered are going to be different. And my rhetorical question is, what choice do we have? And I think that's kind of how I want to take our discussion moving forward. We've been presented by the superintendent with a close to $2.5 million budget deficit again this year, and that's still with funding our school operating budget at a 3% increase over last year. Last year, we barely made it by the skin of our teeth to get the increase that we got, and our communities told us loud and clear, you get this, don't squander it, and we don't have any more to give right now. And so where I struggle is, how do we acknowledge what the community is able and has given us right now with the recommendations that we've been given and the reality that this sucks? We have to find $2.5 million. Someone said, just don't get rid of any more student-facing roles. That happened a year and a half ago, right? We had to reduce student-facing roles last year. We reduced some non-student-facing roles for this year and have realized that while they might not be student-facing, they're crucial to getting paper towels into elementary classrooms. Those might come back. But at this point, every decision we make is going to have a significant impact on an adult's life, their livelihood, our students' opportunities, and it's not fun. It's not a good decision. There is no win-win here. And I think where we need to go now is to provide the administration with some thoughts on where we see this going. Peter, as he shared, he's got to present a budget to us, and that's his responsibility. He's going to have to use every resource available, every opportunity available, every intelligent person in this district available to him to help come up with a budget that meets our guidelines. We voted a 3% increase and does the least amount of damage. But there's no good choice here. And that's exactly the conversation that we had at Budget Sub earlier this week. Nobody likes this. It's terrible. But it's the position that we're in now. And the thing that's really frightening when we look at our enrollment numbers, our enrollment doesn't go up for a while. Our costs are going to continue to increase, but the number of students that we get, and therefore the amount of additional funds that we may get based on students, doesn't increase for a long time. So this is a turn, hopefully in the right direction, but I think this may not be the last year of reductions. And for all of the educators out there, I am so grateful for you coming to speak with us. Please go speak to the community members, go speak to the finance committees, go speak to the select boards, find opportunities to speak at, well, finance committees and select boards, some of them are here this evening. Find opportunities to speak at town meeting. I don't think you could have a more supportive school committee here, but we need support of the broader community, and we need to understand that they're financially willing to support us, and if not, we need to find additional ways to compromise. But it's a terrible position that we're in. Please. Yes, please.
So I think it's a good opportunity to summarize the process one more time. So this was a report that we had a consultant do. The goal of putting a task force together was to vet options that Nate brought forward, and I think Nate did a good job of saying, not every option I bring is going to be something that's palatable to the community, right? There's transparency there. The goal of the task force was to put together a broad range of individuals in our schools and in our community, take a look at options, and provide feedback on what they thought could be palatable options and highlight their priorities. That has to get continued to be refined. You are the ultimate decision makers because you are the ones that vote the budget. And so you may say that there are some options that we can support. There are other options that we can't. You'll see a budget from my office in late January, January 30th is our budget presentation. The budget presentation includes elementary schools, but it also includes district, high school, and junior high as well. So we're talking about a small subset of a total budget presentation. What I can tell you, if it's not one thing, it will have to be something else, right? That's the challenging position we're in, unless there's revenue, and there's not, right? Like we have all agreed to that early, that there's no revenue unless the state comes in with something, and I'm just not sure that that's going to happen. So I think we just need to be prepared that we're understanding that any decision we make has to have some trade-off somewhere else within the budget that is going to be probably equally unpalatable for some other reason, right? That's the challenge of being in year 4 of this. And I recognize it has a tremendous toll on everyone. To go to the culture point, anything we do at this point, and I've been talking with the principals, I know what their thoughts are and the challenge that they see in any options available to them. I know we've had these conversations within our leadership. Everything we do now in the 4th year is somehow significantly changing the way something's operating within the district. And that means all of our schools are getting impacted by this. And it's really becoming more and more challenging as we continue to do this. And I think what's even more frustrating for everyone is we don't know that there's an end in sight in the short term to this. Education funding is cyclical, right? And I think back to probably the worst time I had in my career was my first year as a principal. It was in January of 2009, which was the last major financial crisis that schools had. I took over as a principal in January on a Monday, and on Friday I had to call 22 staff into my office and hand out layoff notices. Like, it was that acute at that point, and we're seeing that same general trend in school funding now that I recall from that time period. And we also heard from some of the staff that in 2012, things started to change and we were starting to add things because, there was more flexibility. These things do come in cycles. We're just not in a good part of the cycle right now. So I think we just want to be cautious about making promises to people. I think the one thing I want to be really clear with our staff is to know the constraints that we have and that we're going to face challenges no matter what we choose to do. I think the good thing is hearing from everybody. You get a much more balanced perspective of the pros and cons of the different options. I know we tried to do that within the task force, even though it's a separate setting, and make sure people were adopting different perspectives. But the perspectives, don't add up to a rosy picture, and I think that's the challenge.
All right. Any last comments or questions from the committee? Lakshmi?
Is there anything in the task force that we did not consider because it wasn't palatable to the community?
Yeah, we did have a couple of things that didn't come forward. Actually, I think I have my notes. Certainly, you've heard Nate mention group size a couple of times. That didn't get very far, mostly over looking at the curriculum that we're using and the group sizes recommended in there. That was some pushback there, and so I think that was probably why that one didn't move. Another one that didn't go very far was as we looked at our counselors and the idea that we might use equity formulas there and share them across schools, the idea of not having a counselor in the building if there were a student in crisis and not having a counselor available to that building leader if there were a student in crisis, just that was one that didn't get very far either. Check real quick here and see if there's anything else that I'm missing here. Jump in.
Classroom assistants, at different levels, like the task force originally considered different levels of reductions to classroom assistants. And before we even voted on any recommendations, we actually took any reductions to classroom assistants beyond 50% off the table. You know, in that one, it was actually from an operational standpoint, we cannot run our schools with a greater than 50% reduction.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have to go back, and if you have an opportunity to go back, would you consider like classroom sizes being bigger as a better alternative than multiple years in a row of more cuts and more cuts?
You know, I think, so either way, it's a reduction, right?
I
Because,
understand.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
because
a
if classroom
deterioration of
sizes grow,
service.
you don't have the number of classrooms that you have.
Yeah.
I think, you know, one thing we're seeing now that we're even looking at is when schools get below about 18 sections in a school, it's hard to operate that as a functional school over time because your population of students with needs gets really concentrated between two sections. And it's hard for principals not to be able to move around. You know, we talked about possible school closure last year, and I know that's come up a couple of times at different points this year. If you're going to reduce the number of general education classrooms, there's going to be some point in time where schools aren't sized right anymore to be a functional school. I think, you know, that presents a challenge. You know, doing that is more often than not successful to try and close a school, and you end up with, you know, a lot of irreparable harm in a community around it. But there are also places that do that. You know, I think there's just, we're really teetering on that edge of what's right. You know, I think knowing the feedback we got last year that for many in our community, closing a school is not an interesting option or one that it was very, very unpalatable.
No, I'm not.
Our
agreeing with
goal
just
is to
one
figure out
option.
how do we make the rest of it work as efficiently as possible. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do at this point is really think about increasing the efficiency. The number of classrooms, you know, and I think Nate pointed to this, the problem is even if, you know, if you have 2 classrooms in a building, you can't dissolve one of them at a grade level because you still are going to end up with the 25 students there. Or you have to be willing to transfer them to other schools, which is not good. And if you have 3 classrooms in a building, you're essentially taking 20 students and putting 10 more in the other classrooms. That's not really a feasible number either to end up with, you know, 31, 32, 33 students in a class. So the numbers just don't play out well based on where we're at as a district right now.
So my concern is that are we naturally going to be forced to get there, whether we like it or not, with years of cuts?
You know, I think ultimately the question is, I don't have the crystal ball. I think you're hearing, I don't think that we're going to have to propose trying every solution that in Nate's report this year, but I do think what we're going to have to be thinking, and I know is on my mind, is that some of these recommendations might have to evolve over several years. The problem is if we go more than 1 or 2 more years with these types of budget challenges, I do think we're going to be in a pretty untenable position and looking at a pretty significant change ahead of us. So I don't know what that is today, but I certainly think that we're venturing close enough into some things that are challenging that if we continue to try and reduce 2 million every year, it's going to be really problematic.
Thank you.
All right. So I think, you know, this whole process sort of, the important come away that I think you started with was that, you know, there is no big savings here. And I thought it was great to point to community misconceptions about that. But then we had an example of somebody coming up, even with this report now being out there, still perpetuating that misconception. And so, you know, I think that that's the task before us, as it was last year, is sort of how do we come together as a community and recognize this is just the austerity politics of previous decades. We've seen this before. And as Peter mentioned, every time that there's a financial crisis, our kids pay for it. You know, when we try to do good initiatives like make classrooms more inclusive, there's no extra funding that comes from that. It's the system that's broken. It's the system that's flawed. The funding model doesn't work, and it's none of our faults. We all need to come together and not fight amongst ourselves and not paint too rosy a picture of things either. Be very clear about what's happening. This is a terrible situation, and we don't know when the end is coming, and we're doing our best. And we want to hear from people, and that's very important that everybody is a part of this process so that we all are making an informed decision together. I also wanted, before we sort of end this discussion, to sort of speak to the suggestion that there's a segregation argument, that we could sort of solve two problems at once by ending, this open enrollment and have community schools, and somehow, that'll end this segregation problem that we have. And I think that is a gross downplaying of actual segregation in our history, and also completely untrue. My children go to one of the majority minority schools, and we love it there, and it's a great community. And I think that is a really stark example of not being helpful in this community process.
Adam, you're a veteran member. I'm brand new, and the past 2 years haven't been great for a brand new member. I think I hear a lot of fear today, myself included. I think that for myself, speaking for myself, the fear I have is that the vote that I cast today, it will impact students for generations to come, because we don't know when this is going to end. I just said we have our mission, vision, value, and we also don't have any more money. Any advice as a veteran member?
All I can share is that when I joined the committee, which was ironically the same year Peter became superintendent, we had a couple years where the finances were good, and we were able to add services and supports and staff. And I believe it's cyclical. We thought that stuff would last forever, and so it hasn't. And my gut tells me, just like Peter has said, there's a cycle to this, and it's going to be tough for a while. There are so many extenuating circumstances outside our control as a committee, outside of the district's control, outside of the town's control. There are funding models that are broken. There are federal funding models that are broken. There are unfunded mandates and tasks that we have to do that we don't get any support for. I hope that the pendulum's going to swing in the other direction, and I wouldn't sleep at night if I thought that this was going to affect kids for generations. And there's so much good that happens here too, regardless of some of these terrible moments that we have, that, we got voted to these seats to sort of balance this really difficult position of doing what's best for the students in our community and meeting the ability of our communities, the ability of our community to fund what we need to do.
If I could share one other thought, having watched this scene play out in a lot of places, and it's terrible everywhere. But I do see generally two different paths through this. The one is to do less with less. Because you're ultimately, and you can dislike every recommendation, every opportunity, every vote by the task force. The only thing I know for certain is you will ultimately pass a balanced budget. That is what schools have to do by law, and I have 4 clients who didn't, and you don't want to be there. But you will pass a balanced budget. And some people do that because they're exhausted, because all the choices stink, and you simply, the superintendent's going to bring you a balanced budget, and people ultimately have to live with it, or some form of it, and you will do less. That's the worst outcome. I've also seen places where they say, okay, we're going to have fewer staff. I mean, school budgets are just people. There's so little else. Transportation is one of the big other things, but you only pay $300,000 for that. Your utilities, that's the other big thing, and you're going to heat your buildings. You're going to keep the lights on. So ultimately, when budgets get tight, and every forecast I've seen says you're at least looking at 2 or 3 more years of this. Forecasts can be wrong, but nobody's saying next year is all going to be better. And the question is, can you pair this reduction in staff that is going to happen with doing things differently. Because you can do the same or even more if you do things differently with less staff. And the challenge is that sometimes people just get too worn out because the less staff part of the discussion is so draining. You really don't want to have the conversation about should we change group size, or you don't really want to have the conversation about do we need to find a way to scale back on meetings so that staff can spend more time. And to be fair, if you're the staff, if some of your colleagues are going away, you're not really in the mood. I mean, you're not in the frame of mind to have those let's do things differently conversations. So the world forces you to do less part. It takes a lot of discipline and it takes a lot of energy to do things differently as well. And we've worked with many systems where at the end of the day, it is not better, but there is more. There are more kids getting math help, more kids getting reading help. It doesn't look the way you do it today, but more kids got the stuff. And at least as a former board member, that was the hope. That's what got me through it was, okay, I'm navigating this very awful thing that they don't pay me nearly enough for, i.e. nothing. But at least we're doing it in a way that is actually increasing the support for kids. Did not want to oversee the doing less part, but the doing it differently is optional. The balancing the budget ultimately is not actually an option. So I have great confidence you will balance the budget. It's up to you all whether you change the way you do things at the same time.
Thanks, Nate. Vikram?
Just hopefully this will end things on an up note. But you said there are downswings and upswings, and could you guys kind of provide a little clarity? Because it seems to me that you just have your tax revenue and money coming in, the number of students, so it doesn't seem like there can be a great ebb and flow. But you're saying that there are these cycles, and we were in a downswing, but what then would cause an upswing, and why does that forecast out to be 2 or 3 years, and what would that look like, and what would cause that?
So I am not an expert on like macroeconomics, but when you look at like new growth in a community, new growth ebbs and flows. And so, new growth is going to be typically in a community is going to be about 0.5% a year is what you can reliably predict, which is why when we talk about sustainable budgets being at 3%, that considers the Prop 2.5 increase that's allowable under law, plus about 0.5% of new growth that becomes new tax revenue to a community where the existing residents don't pay more, but you have growth in the community that allows the tax base to increase. There are periods of time where new growth exceeds that, and so you have new revenues coming in. There are communities in the state that are experiencing extraordinary new growth right now. Places like Ashland and Hopkinton have such new growth that they're building new schools, they're adding classrooms, they're doing all these other things. But it's because more people are flooding into the communities because they're creating that capacity for it. If you have periods of time where new growth is low, or, and that can include like vehicle excise tax, all those other surpluses that we don't get to deal with here impact the overall tax base of the community. That's the stuff that ebbs and flows, and I think the other thing that can ebb and flow is state revenues. The state made a major investment in the Student Opportunity Act. That doesn't impact Acton-Boxborough because we're in that hold harmless status, and we have been for quite a long time. Originally, when we entered hold harmless status, we were one of only a couple dozen communities that were in hold harmless status because the relative resources of our community were high compared to the overall state. We are now one of 212 communities that are in hold harmless status, and there's a significant movement among those communities to pressure the state legislature to rethink, again, that school funding formula. And so that's actually something that's being tossed around in the state legislature. I don't know where that's going to go, but I have a sneaking suspicion that like our long-term future is going to be very much tied to what state funding does. Not to make us feel really good, because I'm going to bring us down a peg, but also if you start looking at national news, you're going to see that there's an increasing frustration with school increases, among voter populations. And so, like, there was an article just recently that Vermont had the single largest shift from Democrat to Republican in the entire nation when it came to state legislature. A lot of that was driven around the school funding formula in Vermont because school funding is almost solely at a state level, which I learned from Nate, and there was a real frustration in communities around why, if our student population is declining, is school funding increasing? So there's also this local frustration around taxes that's appearing. And so I think there's a lot of forces coming into play that, you know, a few of them you might have some influence but no control over, but others you neither have control or influence on, which is frustrating, and you're kind of waiting out the tide to turn. And then, because we're in America, public opinion shifts every other week. And so, you know, that is also something that is not set in stone forever and ever, and times can change. But we are certainly in a place of general public opinion where there's a high expectation, I think, that we're going to have to figure out what our resources are and then learn to work within them.
Thank you.
Quick.
Okay.
I want to loop back to maybe what Rebecca was talking about, which is like, yes, we have a responsibility in this moment and with the resources available to do what we can this year. And there's kind of a bigger systems perspective that I don't want us to lose. And I know I've talked to Adam about, like, what does that look like in terms of advocacy? I think what we heard from folks who work in our district is really important to share back with the people making decisions. I've already drafted an email to our 2 reps and our senator, and I'm happy to send that on behalf of the school committee. But beyond just tonight, I think it's important to also be having a kind of simultaneous conversation about what advocacy looks like from our district, because historically we haven't been super loud in the space of like education advocacy. And I mean, historically we've had a fair number of resources considered compared to other districts, but I just wanted to make sure we're having this kind of simultaneous conversation about kind of the systems statewide piece of this.
Thanks, Leela. Why don't you send me a message and we'll find some time to put that on an agenda for the committee to discuss as a whole, and maybe there's action that we can take and that we can send to our legislators. All right, I want to send out a huge thank you to Tori and to Nate and to the entire budget task force. What you asked to do was really, really difficult. What you provided us was really great information, nothing earth-shattering, but also nothing that is going to be fun to go and implement. So thank you to Nate, Tori, thanks to the budget task force. Thank you to all the educators who came this evening to speak. We have more business to move on to. We'll see how this sort of pans out as the administration presents and develops their budget for next year. Thank you. Are you going to propose that maybe we should let Andrew off the hook with his personnel report?
You just gave it. The personnel report's in the packet.
Yep.
You can read it, but I would suggest maybe what we do is that Brendan and Mark have been waiting for 2 3/4 hours. I'd like to let them do the capital presentation.
Yes, please.
They know that they're going quickly through it, especially given the late hour, but they've been preparing for that. So have them go through the capital presentation, vote the consent agenda, and table any other items that might want future discussion to the next meeting, which is like the finance reports, audit report, things like that people may have questions on.
I guess my question for Sherry is, do we need to vote that investment policy tonight? Is there urgency around that?
It's not absolute urgency, but the quicker you do it, the more money the
The more money
scholarship
we can
account will make.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask the room, are we okay with doing the capital plan update and then moving to consent agenda and passing over the other ongoing business, which was mostly financial related? Great. Brendan, how much coffee do you have left in that mug? Not enough. Ah. Perfect. So we've got Mountain Dews. All right. You need a presentation, though, don't you?
I do. It is open on the machine. It just needs to be loaded. All right. Go for it. Okay. So good evening. I know it's late, so we will go as quickly as we can through this. My name is Brendan Hearn. I am the capital project manager for the district. I'm joined, of course, by Mark Hamill, who's the facilities coordinator. Although I've been with the district for nearly 20 years, Mark and I have only been here in this facilities role for the last 2. This is my first time doing this presentation, so bear with me, but we definitely welcome your questions at the end. So I'm going to start off with a little background on the capital improvement program, but there's a lot of detail in these slides, so I'm going to jump ahead just to a quick summary. So the formal capital improvement program was launched in FY20. It was one of 2 major recommendations from the 2016 District Master Plan Study Report. CIP and formalizing that was one. The other was, of course, the construction of a new twin elementary school, what we know as the Boardwalk campus. First 5 years of that program were funded primarily with a $7.5 million bond. Of course, contributions also coming in from the general fund, as well as the newly established capital stabilization revolving fund. Towards the end of that first 5 years, facilities condition assessments were conducted on all the district buildings to sort of help identify future priorities in terms of what systems needed to be replaced and when. A firm called Bureau Veritas conducted that facilities condition assessment and provided a ton of data for us and different methods to report on it. Before I get into what Bureau Veritas actually looked at, I just want to quickly talk about Boardwalk. Obviously, that was the new building opened in 2022. It was not included in the scope because it was new at that time. It's our first and only fully electric geothermal heating and cooled building. And it has what's called an expected useful life, or EUL, of about 50 years. So that term I just want to quickly define. So EUL is one of a lot of different metrics we use when we're thinking about buildings and condition. It does not imply that after that time span the building is going to crumble to the ground. It's just a way for us to help sort of keep an eye on when we should expect major systems to be upgraded. So a roof might have a typical lifespan of 20 years, whereas an exterior brick and mortar wall might be 75 to 100, but we're saying 50. Some of our older buildings may in fact be closer to 30. So we'll talk through those as we speak about the different buildings. So engineers from Bureau Veritas came out, again, assessed all of our buildings, provided lots of detail. All of these are, of course, in the packet, as well as those detailed slides, so you can review those at your leisure, or feel free to ask questions. We can go back following this. But the major items that Bureau Veritas identified at the high school were building envelope, that is to say exterior-facing components, mortar joints, flashing, the roof, things like that. So envelope work, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing system work, sometimes known as MEP, and miscellaneous interior work. Over at the junior high, they're looking at more additional MEP and envelope work needed there. McCarthy Town, or rather the Parker Damon building containing McCarthy Town and Merriam. This was new construction. It was not a renovation, built in 2002. And we've done a lot of recent HVAC system work and more planned coming up soon. Major elements engineers noted there were site work, as well as actually relatively minor envelope work, interior flooring needs. Blanchard School, that was a major renovation in 1995. Just a reminder, that was the town of Boxborough's elementary school, separate from the district up until 2014. So maintenance for that facility was handled all by the town of Boxborough until we regionalized. A lot of work went into it shortly after that, including boiler upgrades and things of that nature. But Bureau Veritas also identified further site work, building envelope, minor MEP. There's a bit of a pattern here going. Conant School, this is one of our older buildings and a good example of that fact that buildings can continue to function beyond their EUL at 2021, you notice. That said, there is understandably significant site work, additional MEP work, envelope work, as well as space considerations within the building. I'll just pause here and say Conant is a candidate for MSBA funding, either through their accelerated repair program or their core program, and that's an area that we need to continue to explore. The admin building that we're here in now is original 1959, our oldest building, well past its EUL, ending 50 years in 2009. We've had some upgrades, but generally speaking, the building is original, aside from interior, more cosmetic type upgrades. Unfortunately, not a candidate for MSBA funding due to the fact that it's doesn't have sort of standard academic programming, unlike a proper school building. Some of our smaller buildings, including the maintenance facility and the two concessions buildings, were also assessed. These are smaller buildings, lower use. Also, because they're physically smaller, their cost of needs aren't as high. Doesn't mean they don't have them, they're just not as critical at this time. While Bureau Veritas was completing their facilities condition assessment, another firm, Gale Associates, looked at the major athletic facilities on the Charter Road campus in particular. They helped us understand the needs at the junior high and high school tennis courts, which if you've been out there are pretty apparent with the cracking. We're moving forward with resurfacing, sealing, crack sealing work there this spring out of FY25. The Dow track needs spot repair and repainting. The lower fields need a fair amount of work with grading and resurfacing, new carpet and ballast on top. Leary Field, luckily not in terrible shape. It's still relatively new and in good condition, but it is on our sights are on it for the next 10 to 15 years, being ready for replacement. So overall, what did we find? So no surprise, a big enrollment increase between 95 and 2005 that the district was preparing for resulted in a lot of school construction and renovation. And we are now, just now in 2025, hitting the very beginning of that 30-year mark. It doesn't mean we haven't replaced systems. We've done a lot of work in our buildings, especially remember some of those separate systems had EULs, less than 30 years. But we're starting to see that stuff pile up now. So no surprise, a lot of the CIP work over the next 10 years or so will be focused on those building systems. Another key finding here is the district buildings are still heavily reliant on natural gas as their primary fuel source for heating. And then the cooling that we have is limited, it's inconsistent, and in some cases where we have window air conditioners or older AC technology, it's actually inefficient. And just a reminder, June 2024, this school committee did adopt the 2050 decarbonization roadmap, which is going to call and guide us when we're thinking about these mechanical systems to moving towards air source heat pumps, geothermal, and other systems that are more sustainable and doesn't have the same kind of carbon impact. So how do we pay for this? FY25, we had $700,000 allocated out of general fund, and we're hoping to see $1 million for FY26 to accomplish what we need to do most urgently. But we're always watching incentive programs, especially those targeted for decarbonization projects, at the state level with Mass Save, through the utilities, at the federal level with the Inflation Reduction Act, EPA opportunities. Towns of Acton and now recently Boxborough have status as green communities, designated green communities. Boxborough took a long time getting there because of some mechanisms at how the state recognized that town, but they have that designation now. That opens the door for more grant opportunities. MSBA, as I mentioned, either both accelerated repair targeted at major building systems or the core program targeting new building construction and renovation is an option. And then finally, additional borrowing is definitely a topic. It seems hard to think about taking out a loan at this stage, but when you start looking at 10 years down the road, the amount of inflation that's tacked onto projects, 5 to 10 years down, may in fact be more than paying interest and getting the project done sooner. So it's another piece we need to look at pretty carefully. So how do we identify and prioritize projects? So the facility condition assessment, as I mentioned, conducted by Bureau Veritas, and again, the athletic one by Gale, very helpful in providing the heavy lifting of information, key systems, their age, expected lifespan, and conditions. But also principals and administrators provide input. We have an excellent trade staff that's keeping our equipment running and telling us when stuff is really overdue or due for replacement, and sometimes consultants. There's over $150 million worth of work on the CIP list currently, which is looking out approximately 10 years. Just keep in mind a lot of those prices are estimated, so it's hard to put an exact number on it. When we go to prioritize projects, obviously health and safety has to be logically priority one, and in some cases health and safety related projects have the ability to knock other projects off the list or postpone them. So that's always in our mind. We ask the principals and administrators to set priorities, but we know that their scope, their lens is building based. They're generally recommending things based on operational needs or pedagogical needs. They're not looking at it from the same district-wide lens. We don't expect principals to have to know when a rooftop unit is due for replacement. That's our job. but it does mean sometimes our priorities are different. So that's where we come in. District Facilities and Operation Team sets priorities, again, as I said, through that wider lens, respecting what principals have determined to be important as well. Obviously, the availability of funds and incentives is a key factor in determining what we can do and when. And then the capital subcommittee of this school committee has the opportunity for discussion and approval. So what are we doing? What's on the list? So FY25, which we're currently in, still has a lot of work to complete this spring. So again, funded $700,000 from the general fund. The roof on this building is well overdue for replacement. Hoping to get that done as the weather warms. Over at Blanchard, the play equipment upgrades, although mostly community and CPA funded, as you know, a big community fundraising effort, there's still a portion the district is covering over there. Also at Blanchard, the water supply for 4 of the Boxborough properties, known as the Hager Well, requires chlorination. And we're back. So there's a portion the district owes. It's based on the amount of water used from that well that the Blanchard School uses. High school tennis courts, I mentioned, junior high and high school tennis courts need renovation. That's happening this spring. And the high school chemistry lab storage closet needs improved ventilation, also happening this spring. 2 emergent projects came up. The junior high HVAC controls failed on us or started going downhill very rapidly this fall. Those need immediate attention. And Parker Damon, the chiller plant, which was responsible for almost all of the air conditioning in the Parker Damon building, went offline or failed right after school let out. So we're trying to get that back online before cooling season is upon us. In order to fund those 2 emergent projects, we postponed some engineering on the high school for some of the rooftop units there to FY26, which brings us to FY26. So again, we're hoping to see $1 million from general fund to accomplish what we need to. That engineering is now back on the top of the list, rolled over from FY25. So this is looking at 11 of the oldest rooftop units on the building that actually predate construction. They're 1998. Converting those over to air source heat pump. Important to note, we're not actually doing them. We're just doing the engineering to figure out how to do them and how we can price it. There's key work that needs to happen at the high school to increase security. This building here lacks standby power, which is a problem when we have a crisis like we did last fall with the microburst. Parker Damon building is in need of a new paging system. Over at Blanchard, we're hoping to continue working with air conditioning so we can air condition additional classrooms. The asterisk here denoting that there may be incentive funding available if we do this properly. So if we can leverage air source heat pumps to air condition those spaces, and I shouldn't say properly, we have to keep cost in mind, but if we can leverage air source heat pumps, we may be able to get incentive funding and bring it to somewhere around the cost of the window units that have traditionally been used in that building. Our maintenance facility or maintenance shed just down the street here needs some new doors. Over at Boardwalk, even though it's a new building, we need to investigate some options for improving the way the library is used. It's a 2-floor space, each floor used by one of the 2 Gates and Douglas schools, trying to find ways to allow improvements to the acoustics so those 2 schools can coexist in the space without distracting each other. Also at Boardwalk, a small fencing project to increase student safety between the play area and the active loading dock where trucks are coming and going over the course of the day. Junior high, also looking to increase additional air conditioning as well as replace some failing and building original ductless split systems. Again here, if we can leverage air source heat pumps to do this, which is junior high is a good candidate being 1 story with a flat roof, we may be able to do something incentive based there. Over at Parker Damon, also some fencing for student safety along the rear playground. The cell tower proposal that the school committee approved earlier this fall, if the district wants to invest in public safety and operational communications, that cost comes back to us. So some of that infrastructure work needs to be done at the time of tower construction to be done cost effectively. So that's built into this FY26 plan. Transportation Department, upgrade to the wireless camera system to allow better access to their cameras. The buses have cameras now, but accessing the footage from them is challenging and extremely slow. And finally, some asphalt resurfacing work for safety, limited areas and high needs areas only. We're not doing massive swaths. But here at the high school, Conant and Blanchard needs those. Before I open it up to questions, just a quick acknowledgement. We have 40 or more than 40 men and women in the facilities department that do an outstanding job. Their efforts are what keep a lot of the projects off the CIP list, but it can't be done indefinitely. In some cases, though, our tradespeople have been able to take a lot of the cost out of those CIP projects by either conducting them in-house, providing some of the services, or whatever it is. So a big thank you to them, and any questions?
Thanks, Brendan.
What was my time? Anyone clock it?
I did. You don't want to know.
Oh, come on.
I think you were just shy of 20 minutes.
No. Sorry.
Vikram. You did great, though. Yeah.
Next time we'll double up on Mountain Dews.
That's right. More Mountain Dews.
Just a quick question. You said health and safety is number one. Does cooling in the buildings when it gets really hot is that considered health?
I'll go with that one. It can. Yes, in our opinion, there's a fine line between how much cooling is needed, right? So if you give me a quantification of the temperature that's in the classroom, if we're talking exceeding 85 degrees, yes. Yes, especially with some of the current students we have, we do consider that the case.
Do you have an update on the bid on the roofing here?
I do, sure. So we had a public bid just last week. We had a bid opening, and we are currently in the stage of going through references and DCAM certification. For anyone that doesn't know, in public procurement, if it's over $150,000, you have to be DCAM certified. And we had quite a few bidders that were not, unfortunately. So between that, we did conduct what's called a nuclear test on the building last night for moisture in the insulation, to also get a better idea of how much square footage of insulation and decking we may need to replace. And the results so far were very positive for us. Not nearly as much as one would think with the amount of leaks we've patched over the past couple of years. So that's good news. We're hoping just after the new year to be awarding it and scheduling it for the spring.
Hi. It's a little frustrating to see that the brand-new building has a sound issue when clearly that was an oversight with the designing of the space. I mean, anybody could tell you that was not wise. I guess it's also equally frustrating to see that health and safety is a priority, and yet that is top of the list, and Conant having no air conditioning is nowhere on the list.
There are some current funding sources. Peter might be able to share a little bit more on that. We have some meetings coming up February, I believe, in February at the school itself, some walkthroughs. Peter can share more.
So Becca, I think, the biggest piece with Conant is the school committee needs to make a decision about if that is going forward in the MSBA process. We had it in the MSBA process, and if you remember, we withdrew it last year, given the state of our funding. We just weren't in a position for that. We were extremely high in MSBA's process, so if we go forward with that, Conant obviously would be a candidate for either some type of a major renovation or replacement. We don't know the future of that. However, until we do that, it's really challenging to put large amounts of money into a building that could undergo, significant state funding.
Understood. And I know that came up during the discussion when we were deciding whether or not, it made sense at the time to move forward with that. But when we're talking health and safety, it gets very, very hot, as we saw this last year.
I just want to add real quick, CIP isn't the only funding source for buildings, right? Operation and maintenance funds cover things, and especially smaller scale items or items that come up emergent over the course of the year.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you guys very much. Appreciate you staying late for us. All right, we are going to skip through on our agenda all the way to the consent agenda because it's after 10 o'clock, and we know that anything that we do after 10 o'clock is usually not productive. So, items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I'll read each item, and if a member would like it held, please say hold. You don't have to be present as a member to vote on the meeting minutes. Item 1, approval of the ABRSC meeting minutes of 12/5/2024. Item 2, approval of the Friends of Acton Libraries $18,000 donation to the ABRSD libraries, and approval of warrants as presented in the packet of 12/19/2024. Those were the 3 items. Hearing that none were held, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
So that was Leela and then Vikram. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? That is unanimous. And then our next meeting is after the new year and after the holidays on January 16th. So before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I just want to thank everybody for their participation and engagement this evening and wish you all a very happy holidays and a wonderful break. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
That's Ben, then Vikram. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.